This didn't happen to me directly, it was actually one of my co-workers. He's not the type to exaggerate stuff either, which is why I've always thought something of it. This was sometime mid-last year, around July I think. He was doing grocery delivery on the side at the time, similar to apps like DoorDash and stuff like that, but it was in a pretty rural area. Not the main part of town either. He got sent out to one of those sort of semi-rural areas where it's basically farmland mixed with random houses. It was already pretty late as well, around 10:30 p.m, and he said that he'd almost declined the job because it was out of the way, but it paid a bit extra, so he took it. The place that he had to deliver to, it was down a long stretch of road with no streetlights, just fences, paddocks, and the occasional driveway. The GPS was working, but he said that it felt off because there were barely any landmarks. Everything looked the same in the dark. He eventually finds the address, though. It's one of those older houses set way back from the road. Long dirt driveway, no visible lights on except for a small one near the front door. He pulls up, but doesn't turn the engine off, just leaves the headlights on, grabs the groceries, walks them up, drops them at the door, takes the photo and turns around. Standard stuff. But then, on the way back to the car, he said that he got this feeling like someone was standing behind him all of a sudden. Not a noise exactly too, but just sort of like an awareness that you get sometimes. He turned around, but there was nothing there. He shrugs it off and gets back into the car. Now, the way that the road was set up, about 20 to 30 meters ahead was a T intersection. Straight ahead was just forest, and there were no houses, no fencing, just a line of trees. He starts driving forward, and as he's rolling toward the intersection, something hits the ground in front of him. Not small either, loud enough in fact that he slammed the brakes. It was one of those metal road signs. Not the main stop sign, but one of those smaller advisory signs. It had been standing upright, and now it was flat across the road. He said that there was no wind and no cars, no sound of anything moving it, which was strange. At this point, he's pretty on edge, and he sort of looks around with the headlights, but there was nothing that he could see. There was nobody either side of the road, no movements in the trees, nothing. He considered getting out to move it, but in the end he decided against it, and instead he slowly sort of steers around it, half on the dirt road, just wanting to get out of there. And as he turns left at the intersection, his headlights sweep across the tree line directly ahead of him. And that is when he saw it. He described it as a dog at first, medium to large size, pale, almost white coat, standing just inside of the tree line. But the part that stuck with him wasn't the dog itself, it was how still it was. No shifting, no flinching from the headlights, nothing. Just standing there looking straight at the car. He said that the eyes reflected back like normal animal eyes do, but they didn't move. No blinking, no head turn, nothing. Just completely zeroed in on him. He slowed down for a second without really meaning to, then had that gut reaction like, don't stop here. So he kept going. After he passed it, he checked the mirror, and he said that this thing got up on two legs and ran into the tree line. And upon seeing that, he literally took off. He told me that he didn't go home straight away either. He drove back toward town, parked under some streetlights near a gas station, and just sort of sat there a bit, trying to calm himself down. But here's the part that made the whole thing even worse for him. The next day, he went back during daylight, not to investigate anything weird, but he just wanted to prove to himself that it was normal, that the place was regular. That the house was there, same as before, but the intersection looked different in a way that he couldn't explain. And the sign that fell? Still there, but bent at the base like it had been loose for a while. The tree line area where he saw the dog as well, there was a wire fence running along it that he somehow didn't notice at night. There were no gaps in it from what he could see, which was weird because there's no obvious way for a dog that size to be standing where he saw it. He actually ended up asking one of the nearby property owners later when he was doing another delivery out there, just sort of casually mentioning it, seeing a white dog around, The guy told him that no one in that stretch keeps dogs loose because of livestock here. In fact, he said that if anything does get out, it usually doesn't last long here. So yeah, it could have been nothing, I suppose. Loose sign, random stray, bad lighting. But he insists that he saw that dog get up on two legs and run like a person. He still delivers, but he now pretty much avoids that area if he can, even if the pay is better. And honestly, hearing him explain it all, I probably would too. So I'm 31, hadn't dated properly in years, and finally decided to get back into it. I downloaded a couple of apps, wasn't expecting much, just figured that I'd meet some people and see how it goes. I matched with this guy, he called himself Ryan. He seemed normal enough over text, a bit dry, but not in a bad way. We talked for a few days, and then he suggested hanging out at his place, just playing some games and having a smoke. The first weird thing happened, though, before we even met. We were on the phone just confirming the plan, and out of nowhere he goes, "Hey, just so you know, I'm not some psycho or anything." Then he kind of laughed after that. It wasn't said like a joke, though, more like he wanted me to react to it, I guess. I really didn't know what to say, so I just sort of laughed it off and I moved on. I should have taken that more seriously in hindsight, though. He lived in a unit complex. The place wasn't sketchy or anything, just a normal older block. When I got there, I could tell straight away that something was off, though. Not dangerous yet, but just off. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept and his eyes weren't really focusing properly. I sat down and noticed a bunch of these tiny liquor bottles on the coffee table, some empty and some still sealed. He cracked another one open while we were talking and just drank it straight. I asked if he'd been out or something and he said no, he'd just been trying to relax a little bit. We put a game on, but he couldn't focus on it at all. He kept restarting conversations, asking the same questions twice, then saying things that contradicted what he had just told me. Sort of like he'd say that he'd worked full-time, then 5 minutes later, say that he hadn't had a job in like 5 months. Stuff like that. Then he said it again. "You're all right. I'm not going to hurt you or anything, you know." Same tone as before, not joking, just dropped it into the conversation like it belonged there. At this point, I was a bit on edge, but I'd already smoked a bit with him, and I think that I was trying to convince myself that it was just awkwardness or maybe just nerves. He tried to make a move at one point. I went along with it for a bit, but then he just sort of stopped halfway through and just sort of zoned out, like completely checked out for a few seconds. Things got weirder too. He asked if I could help him with his back because he said that it was locking up. I said sure. I've done basic physio stuff before, so I was being careful, nothing rough. And after a minute he goes, "No, that's not how you do it," and tells me to switch so that he can show me. We swap, and almost immediately I knew that I had made a mistake. He started pressing down way too hard, not like a normal massage at all, like full body weight, sharp pressure. I told him to ease up a bit and he said, "It's meant to hurt though, that's how you fix it." I told him straight up that it was too much and to stop. He didn't really stop though, just sort of adjusted slightly, still way too rough. Then he just suddenly asks me, "Do you ever think about why you don't take care of yourself?" That threw me. I've got pretty bad teeth, always been a bit insecure about it, so I assumed that that's what he meant. I just kind of shrugged it off and didn't answer properly. Then he starts talking about his sister. Says that she died a few years ago. Says that she went to a guy's house for the first time and never came back. I didn't interrupt, just let him talk. But the way that he was saying it didn't feel like he was opening up. It felt rehearsed almost. Then he goes quiet for a few seconds and says, "I think about it sometimes, like what it felt like from his side." That's when my whole body just went cold. Like instantly, full-on panic response, no build-up, nothing. He was sitting on my lower back at that point, not pinning me exactly, but enough that I couldn't just get up normally. And I had this really strong intrusive thought that if I stayed still, something bad was about to happen. Not based on anything that I saw, but just sort of a gut reaction that I couldn't ignore any longer. I rolled over pretty quickly and sat up, trying to keep it casual, and said that I needed to head off because I had an early start and all that. He didn't argue, but he just sort of stared at me for a second too long before moving off. While I was grabbing my stuff, he said again, "You're safe here, you know that, right?" Same exact tone as before, no smile. I left straight away. Didn't run, but I certainly didn't hang around either. I got in my car and locked the doors before I even started it, and the whole drive home I kept checking my mirrors, which I don't normally do, but it just felt like I needed to that day. The next day, he started messaging me again too. Nothing aggressive, but the vibe was certainly off. Like overly familiar, then suddenly cold, and then back to normal. It's difficult to explain just how this felt, but it just wasn't like before. I told him that I wasn't interested in meeting again, and asked him to not contact me anymore. He sent one more message that just said, "Fair enough," and, well, that was it. I blocked him on everything after that. I really don't know what his deal was. Maybe he was just drunk and dealing with some serious issues. Maybe I overreacted a little bit, I guess, but I've met plenty of awkward or drunk people before and never had that level of alarm go off in my head. It wasn't any one specific thing, I suppose. It was more the repetition and the way that he talked about violence like it was something that he'd thought through, and how physical he got without really responding when I told him to stop. I've trusted that feeling ever since then. If something feels off early, I don't try to rationalize it anymore. And while that night could have just been something weird and really nothing else to it, I wasn't interested in finding out just how it might have ended if I had stayed any longer. This was back in 2011, when me and a group of friends, Alex, Sam, Tori, Matt, and Jordan, decided to go camping in the Great Otway National Park. We picked a backcountry spot, far off the main tracks. None of us were drinking that night. Tori's allergic to alcohol or something, and it was a dry trip for her. We set up camp, built a small fire, and were just hanging out, chatting about random stuff. At some point, I noticed Alex got really still though. He just stopped talking mid-sentence. His head tilted slightly, like he was listening to something. He whispered, "Shut up, just listen." We all froze. And then it hit me. The forest, it was completely dead. Not quiet for a minute, but every sound had just been completely erased. And there were no crickets, no birds, nothing. Normally you would at least hear frogs, and in the trees the faint rustle of wildlife, but now there was nothing. Alex's voice was barely a whisper. "Guys, this doesn't feel normal. It could be a predator, maybe a big cat or something. We probably want to move to the car at least." Before anyone could react though, something appeared maybe 30 meters away in the tree line. A small red orb, glowing from within, moving slowly between the trees. It wasn't a flashlight, it wasn't a firefly, it wasn't a reflection. It had its own light, like molten metal suspended in the air. It moved deliberately too, weaving behind trunks and branches, disappearing for a second and then reappearing. It lasted maybe 20 seconds, I would say, then dimmed and just vanished. And just like that, the forest sounds, they came back. The frogs, the wind, the subtle buzz of the night, it all returned at once. We sat there stunned. Nobody spoke for a solid minute. I finally said, "There's no road behind these trees, right?" We all agreed. No cars, no distant lights, nothing. We got up slowly, our eyes scanning, but we didn't see anything. We didn't talk too much after that. We decided to pack up and move to a proper campsite with other people instead. Something lit, something that felt safe. We didn't even joke about it until the next morning, when we explained the situation to the site manager, trying to make it sound sort of ridiculous so it wouldn't freak her out. Her face, though, went completely blank. Then she leaned in and said, "This area, well, it's old growth, and stories like that aren't unheard of here. Some people say it's spirits or something, some say legends, no one really knows. But it's not the first time that people have seen a light out there. We were 6 experienced campers at this point. None of us had ever panicked like that before. And Alex, he's basically a forest professional now. Works in forestry half the year, in fact. And I mean, he's seen all kinds of wildlife, been in situations that most of us couldn't even handle. And even he admitted that he was shaken for weeks afterward. I remember the sensation vividly too. The forest going silent, the way that my heart felt like it was pounding in my ears, and that orb, hovering and flickering, casting faint red shadows on the nearest trees. It moved about the speed of somebody walking casually, I would say, and while it seemed like there was a weight to it, it was also like it wasn't entirely subject to gravity. My stomach turned and I could feel my body tensing in a way that I didn't know was even possible. I've almost died before once, but the fear from that orb, I would say that it was worse. We still talk about it from time to time when we get together, and it's always the same. Goosebumps, a cold feeling in your chest, and that mental knot in the pit of your stomach. I've had nightmares about it for years, in fact. And honestly, I don't know what it was, and I'm not even sure that I want to. Even sharing this now, thinking about the way that that light moved, how the forest seemed wrong, it's giving me chills. There's definitely something out there that we don't understand, something that can make the world go completely silent for a moment like that. And it's big enough and intelligent enough that you notice it before you even realize that you're that terrified. By early 2018, my family had just moved into a small cottage. We were still unpacking when the weather suddenly turned absolutely brutal. A blizzard hit, cutting off all the nearby roads. The entire area was blanketed in deep snow, and the village felt completely isolated. With schools closed for almost 2 weeks and nothing much to do as well, I decided to eventually take my dog Max out for a walk. I was pretty new to the area and wanted to check out the nearby woods and the bogland. So after trudging through the snow for about 20 minutes, we reached the edge of the bog. There was a faint trail that I noticed that led into a small patch of artificial woodland, trees planted in rows, clearly human-made. I followed the trail deeper though, Max sticking close. The snow was soft and fresh, and the forest was eerily quiet. That's when I saw some strange prints. They looked like hoof prints, but small. Probably a young deer, I thought. But they also didn't really make a lot of sense. What I mean is that they started right in the middle of the trail, as if something had appeared out of nowhere, and then, just a few meters further along, they stopped. Not a trail leading into the woods, not a splash in a snowdrift, they just ended. I walked over the prints slowly, squinting at each one. They were all the same size, evenly spaced, perfectly formed, as if whoever or whatever was walking had been careful enough to not slip. I reached the surrounding snow and the trees to see if the deer had leapt off. Maybe it was hidden under the snow or something, but there was nothing. No broken branches, no scattered twigs, nothing to suggest that it left the trail in a natural way. Even Max, who usually runs ahead sniffing everything, was suddenly hesitant, growling softly at the forest. I decided to keep moving along the trail, following the prints to where they ended. The deeper that I went, the heavier the feeling in my chest became though, like something was watching me. I kept looking over my shoulder, but I didn't see anything. Then, between two trees up ahead, I saw movement. At first, I thought it was a person. The figure was tall, thin, and hunched, moving in a strange, almost jerky way. Its limbs seemed too long and too jointed, and the way that it moved, it didn't feel natural. I froze. Max barked once, low and warning-like, then stayed silent. The figure stopped too. It had a pale greyish complexion, and the head, it wasn't quite human. It was elongated with a narrow face, almost no visible mouth, and dark eyes that reflected the dim light in a way that made it impossible to look away. I swear that I could also see faint hair or bristly fur along its shoulders. The arms were long, dangling almost to its knees, and the hands looked wrong, thin and claw-like fingers. It just stared at me, and I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I felt my stomach tighten, like my body knew that I was in danger but had no way to react. I stood there like that for, I don't know, maybe 5-10 seconds, and then it turned and glided between the trees, disappearing as silently as it appeared. I tried to rationalize it, that maybe it was a deer that had lost its way in the snow, maybe a person in some kind of a costume, but honestly, there's nothing that I could come up with. The proportions, the movement, the way it appeared and just vanished like that, nothing made sense. Over the next few days, I kept exploring the bog and the surrounding forest, partly out of curiosity, but partly because I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. And that's when I noticed tracks that didn't belong to any animal that I knew. They were humanoid-ish, I would say, but with long, narrow feet, clawed toes, and uneven strides. Some prints were upright, like somebody walking, but others seemed crouched or sort of elongated, as if whatever it was could shift between postures. Sometimes I'd glance up and catch movement at the tree line, a shadow slipping between the trunks, but whenever I focused, nothing was there. I never did see it again directly after the first encounter, but the tracks kept showing up for days afterward, always ending abruptly, like the creature literally just disappeared into thin air. Every time that I walked the trail alone, Max would growl or stiffen, refusing to go any further. And years later, I still have no explanation. I have the snow-covered landscape, the prints, and the memory of something distinctly inhuman watching me from the woods. I took some photos that day as well, but like with the prints, nothing in the pictures shows the creature or anything really, I guess, definitive proof. The image is just like snow, trees, and shadows, and a few prints here and there that look a little bit odd. These days, though, I don't go back to that forest now. I stick to the roads and the cleared trails. But if anyone has a rational explanation for the phantom deer prints or human tracks like this, then honestly, I'm all ears. Deep down, though, I really don't think that there is one, but heck, you never know. So myself and a friend of mine were driving back after a few days away. It was a long, empty highway, barely any traffic. It must have been around 2 a.m., maybe a little bit later. The weather was pretty bad though, heavy rain. Not quite a cyclone or anything, but strong enough that visibility was trash and the road was basically reflecting headlights like a mirror. We'd been holding it for a while and finally pulled off near one of those sort of small roadside fuel stops. It's the kind that had like one building and nothing else for miles. It was closed. No lights on inside, no cars parked there, just us. We walked a bit away from the building towards some scrubland next to a low hill. Not dense forest or anything, just scattered trees and rocks. We went there because we needed to relieve ourselves. While we were standing there, my friend goes quiet for a second and then says, "Do you see that up there?" I looked where he was pointing. There was a rock formation on the slope, maybe 30 or 40 meters away. It took me a second, but yeah, there was something on top of it. At first I thought it was just a weird shadow from the rain in the headlights, but then it shifted slightly. It looked like a person, standing upright, not moving much and just facing us. No umbrella, no jacket that I could make out, just a dark shape against the sky. It didn't react to the rain at all, which already felt off. I mean, we were only out there for a few moments, and in that time we had to constantly move the water from our eyes at the very least. My friend said that it looked like a woman based on the outline. Honestly, I couldn't tell though. The proportions were just a little bit off, I suppose. The arms looked a little bit too long, like they were hanging lower than they should have. Could have been the angle, I suppose, but it just didn't sit right with me. We both stopped what we were doing though and just watched it for a few seconds. It didn't wave, didn't step down, didn't do anything normal. It just sort of stood there. At that point, we went back to the car, and once inside, we had that moment where you sort of try to convince yourself that it's nothing. Just a random weirdo, maybe. Maybe somebody broken down nearby. Whatever. But it didn't explain why they were just standing on a rock in the middle of nowhere in that weather, looking down on us like that. My friend then suggested turning the car so that the headlights would hit the hill properly. I didn't really want to, but I did it anyway because he insisted. When the high beams lined up, things got worse. You see, the figure on the rock was gone, but instead, off to the side of the rock, we saw two people suddenly, both crouched down, dragging something across the ground. It looked like a large bag, the kind that you'd use for like heavy rubbish or maybe equipment or something. They were pulling it behind the rock, like they didn't want it visible from the road. Both of them were dressed fully dark, hoods or something over their heads. When the lights hit them, they both turned at the same time. That's when I noticed their faces. They were not normal. Covered, but not just cloth, something solid. Smooth, pale shapes where their faces should be. It could have been masks, I suppose, but they didn't reflect light like plastic usually does. More matte and no visible eye holes from where we were. They only looked for maybe a second before continuing what they were doing, like we didn't even matter. What stuck with me more, though, was just how they moved. Not coordinated like two people working together, more like they were both reacting to the same signal at the exact same time. They were sort of in sync in a really weird way. I didn't wait around. I put the car in drive and got back on the highway straight away. We didn't talk much for a bit and just drove. About 10 minutes later, my friend asked me if I noticed something else back there, and I said yeah, the masks, the bag, all of that. And he said no. Before we turned the headlights, when the figure was still on the rock, he thought that it bent down in a way that didn't make much sense. Like the legs didn't bend properly, more like it sort of folded in on itself before dropping out of sight. I personally did not see that, but it certainly lines up with how I felt at the time, that whatever was up there, that it didn't move like a normal person. Here's the part though that really bothered me. So the next day I checked the map to see exactly where we stopped. That patch of land isn't connected to anything. No nearby houses, no side roads leading into it. Really, there's absolutely nothing there for miles. Just highway and scrub. Also, with just how bad the weather was, I mean, we should have seen at least one other car if people were out there doing something. But unless they really hit it somewhere, I mean, I didn't see one. No headlights, no engine sounds, nothing except for the rain. I never did report it. Didn't feel like there was anything concrete to say without sounding absolutely insane. I mean, two guys with masks dragging a bag in the rain and some strange figure that folded in on itself up on a rock. That isn't exactly useful without details, and we didn't stick around long enough to get any either. Still, the part that I cannot explain is the first figure. I mean, where did it go in that split second? And why did it look so wrong to me? I haven't stopped in isolated places like that at night since then, because honestly, it's just not worth it. I'm sharing this because, well, I need some outside opinions before I decide what to do next. I'm not trying to exaggerate anything here as well, just laying out what's exactly been happening. So we live in a quiet street, and mostly older houses here, nothing weird going on normally. But around mid-2022, the woman who used to live a few houses down died after falling down her stairs. And after that, the place sat empty for a bit, then her daughter moved in with her own kid. From what we can tell, the daughter is in her mid-40s and doesn't really manage things very well. The house went downhill pretty quickly, in fact. There were cats everywhere, like way too many, and they just sort of roam the street now. Honestly though, the animals aren't the main issue. Her daughter, I'll call her Elle for privacy reasons, is the problem. We don't know her exact age, but she looks older than a teenager, but certainly doesn't act like an adult either. It could be anywhere from like late teens to mid-20s, I would say. The mum told us that she's autistic, which, I mean, I can understand. But the behavior goes beyond anything that I've personally ever seen before. Like, the first thing that happened was with my partner. This was not long after they moved in. He was out walking the dog during the day, and Elle ran straight up to him, hugged him tight, and started crying. No warning, and he tried to ask her if she was okay, but she switched topics mid-sentence and started talking about something random. He figured that she had some kind of a disability and just sort of disengaged and left. At that point, it just sort of seemed awkward, but certainly not dangerous. My first direct interaction was a lot worse, though. I was outside and she walked up and hit me on the side of the head. Not hard enough to injure me, but certainly not a tap either. I told her clearly not to touch me. She backed off but just stood there, staring at me. I messaged her mother about it and got the usual apology, plus she doesn't understand boundaries sort of thing. After that, though, I started noticing patterns too. I work late, so I'm outside at odd hours, usually between 1 and 3 a.m. with the dog. That's when I started seeing her pretty regularly. Not just walking around as well, but standing in weird places doing, well, nothing. One night, in fact, I was walking a friend out to her car. We have a small entry space between our main door and a metal security gate. It's tight, but not somewhere that you'd usually stand. But Elle was just there in the dark, wedged between the doors, facing the wall, not moving, hair hanging down so that you couldn't really see her face. It was really creepy. My friend noticed her before I said anything and just went, "What the heck is that?" We both left pretty quickly after that. I kept seeing her around cars as well, and one time she was trying handles, like checking if they were unlocked. When she noticed me, she crouched down behind one and stayed completely still. But I could still see part of her through the gap. I mean, it wasn't subtle. Another time, I thought that she was locked behind the gate again, so I sort of ignored it and walked back to my place. Turns out that she wasn't. She had gotten out and was hiding near a car or something, and as soon as I got closer to my door, she came out and started walking toward me fast, saying, hey, come here, over and over again. I didn't engage. I went straight inside and I shut the door. That's when I told my partner as well that something felt really off. Not just she doesn't understand social cues, but like she was actively watching the house. He thought that I might be overreacting at the time, which honestly I sort of get because he hadn't seen much of this, but then something happened that really changed his mind. So about 6 months ago, I had a really bad asthma episode and had to go to hospital pretty quickly. My partner wasn't home, so I had to leave my son, he's 16, there alone for a short time. I gave him a phone and told him to call if anything happened, and he called me while I was in the emergency room. He said that Elle was outside banging on the door and ringing the bell repeatedly. Then she started going through things on the porch, picking up shoes and putting them on, walking around and then trying the door again. The first thing that I told him to do was to lock everything and not respond. While I'm literally struggling to breathe, I'm also messaging the mum telling her to get her kid off my property, and eventually she left. After that, though, Elle kept coming back. Not every night, but enough that we noticed things being moved. Shoes especially. She'd take them all the time and walk around outside and then leave them somewhere else. So, I installed a camera, and the footage confirmed it. She'd come onto the property between 1 and 3 in the morning, pick things up, sometimes just stand there looking at the door, doing nothing, which was really creepy. Like not knocking or anything, just standing there and staring at the door. I told her mum again, more firmly this time, basically said that she was out at unsafe hours and needs supervision. I got a vague response, but nothing changed. And then today happened. So we had a food delivery arrive to our place. My partner opened the door to grab it, when out of nowhere, Elle comes around from beside a parked car, already holding some random food item in her hand. She walks straight past the delivery driver and tries to enter our house. No hesitation, no asking, just walks in like she lives there. My partner blocked her physically with his body. She kept shifting side to side trying to get around him, and not aggressive in a sort of loud way, but certainly persistent, like she was testing gaps. The delivery driver, the poor guy, just froze. Then she got really close to my partner, like face-to-face distance, and she started sniffing him. Actually sniffing. Not subtle either. She handed him the food that she was holding and said, "What are you going to call it?" He just said, "I don't know," because, what else do you say to that? She then leaned toward the delivery driver and made this sort of low growling sound, face twisted, teeth showing. It wasn't a joke or playful either. It looked forced, like she was trying to mimic something. And then she just walked off. After the driver left, my partner just stood there for a second and went, "Yeah, okay, something's not right about that one." And this is the part that's really hard to explain properly without sounding like dramatic or whatever, but when she was at the doorway, up close, he said that her face just didn't look right. Not like makeup or anything obvious, just really off. The way her mouth moved when she made that sound didn't match normal expressions, like the muscles weren't actually syncing properly with the sound. He said that it reminded him of someone trying to copy a human expression rather than actually making one naturally. And look, I know how that sounds. I'm not saying that it was anything supernatural or anything too, but it definitely was really weird and enough to shake him. And so, now we're at the point where this isn't just annoying neighbor sort of thing anymore. She's entering the property at night, trying doors, approaching us physically, and now attempted to walk into the house while we were distracted. Her mum isn't controlling it or trying to do anything about it too, and we're considering reporting it, but we're not sure how that goes given the situation. Right now we've added more cameras and keep everything locked, even during the day. And I don't think she's just wandering as well. I think that she's actually fixated on this house in particular, and on my family. I don't really want to wait and see how far that goes, and so that's why I'm here. Do you guys have any advice or know anything about how to handle something like this? This was early 2023 in a unit that I rented. It was an older apartment block, probably built in the 80s. Cheap rent, which should have been my first clue. The landlord mentioned the last tenant left in a hurry, but didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. First few nights were pretty normal there, but then around the end of the first week, I sort of woke up randomly. No noise that I remember waking me, just that sudden I'm awake feeling. I checked my phone, 2:17 a.m. I only remember the time because it kept repeating after that. Right after I checked it as well, I heard a small click from the hallway. Sounded exactly like the bathroom latch. Then a second later, the shower turned on. That didn't make any sense because I live alone, and the bathroom is about 5 meters from my bed. I got up and went to go and check it. The door was slightly open. When I pushed it fully, everything was normal. The shower was off, tiles dry, no steam, nothing out of place. I wrote it off as maybe pipes or something, old building, pressure changes, whatever. The next night, though, same thing. 2:17 a.m., click, shower running. This time I stayed in bed and I just listened. The water ran for maybe 30 to 40 seconds and then stopped. After that I heard something else as well, what sounded like wet footsteps on the tiles, then onto the hallway floor. The sound stopped right outside of my bedroom and I didn't get up that time. Morning came, I checked again. The floor was dry, no marks, no smell, nothing. By the third night I was already awake before 2:17 a.m. and I wanted to see if it would still happen if I was expecting it. And it did. Same sequence. The click, the water on, but this time there was another sound mixed in. Hard to explain, but it almost sounded a bit like breathing, but uneven, like someone standing under the water. Not loud, but certainly close enough that it felt like it was inside of the room with me. After the water shut off, I heard the steps again, slower this time, and my bedroom door handle moved slightly. Not a full turn, but just enough to make that small metal sound. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I set up my phone to record the bathroom, propped it up facing the door in the shower, and I left the light off and just used the hallway light for visibility. I checked the footage in the morning, and at exactly 2:17 a.m., the bathroom door opens by itself, not wide enough, but just enough to show inside. Then the shower turns on. There was no one visible in the frame. After a minute, you can see something change in the mirror, though. Not a clear figure, but more like a darker patch inside of the steam, but the weird part is the angle. The mirror shows more of the room than the camera should be able to even see. At one point, it sort of looks like there's something behind where the phone is positioned. Tall shape, but sort of distorted. Not clear enough to identify, but definitely not just normal steam. I replayed it multiple times thinking that it was a trick of the light, or maybe compression artifacts or something. That night, I stayed awake again, but this time I didn't stay in my bed. I sat on the edge facing the bathroom. 2:17 a.m., same as before. The door opens, water on. But now I could hear something else. I could hear, like, quiet talking. Not actual words at first, but more like someone trying to speak while out of breath. I got up and walked over. I don't know why, probably curiosity more than anything, but the bathroom was filled with steam, even though it hadn't been running long, and the mirror was fully fogged. Then I noticed movement on the mirror itself. Something was tracing lines through the condensation from the inside, almost like a finger dragging across it, slow and deliberate. I just stood there. It didn't spell anything out. It was just sort of random. I said out loud at this point, "What is this?" Not yelling and just talking. As soon as I spoke, though, the water shut off immediately, and everything went quiet. Then I heard something behind me. Not footsteps this time, but more like fabric dragging across the floor. I instantly turned around, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, the random swirls and everything were now gone. Completely wiped, like it had never even been there. As you can probably imagine too, that was enough for me. The next day I started packing, and before I left, I asked the landlord directly if anything had happened in the unit before me. He avoided the question at first, then said that the last tenant complained about noise at night and water issues, but nothing was ever proven. I didn't push any further. One more thing though is that on the last night I slept at a friend's place, but I went back the next morning to grab the last of my stuff, and I checked the camera one final time. There was a recording from 2:17 a.m. again. Same door opening, same shower turning on. But this time, for a brief second, the camera picked something up properly. In the reflection, there was a figure standing in the hallway. Tall and thin, but you couldn't make everything out exactly. The head was sort of slightly tilted, I would say, like it was trying to look at itself in the mirror. And the way that it stood didn't look very stable. And then, it was just gone again. I moved out that week, and I haven't had anything like that happen since then. I still wake up sometimes around that time, but there's no sounds anymore, thankfully. If it was just a plumbing issue or some kind of a structural issue, or fine, I could have dealt with that. But I've lived in older places before, and I've never experienced anything like this. Either way, I'm not going back there to figure it out, and I just hope that the next person, well, that they're doing okay. A few years back, me and my mum went to stay with my grandfather. He lives on a property about maybe 20 or 30 minutes outside of town. No close neighbours, just open land and a long dirt driveway. House isn't really that old either. He had it built around 2015. Inside, it's basically one big open area. Kitchen, lounge, dining, all connected. There's also one bedroom downstairs and a loft above it, laundry room at the back with a door that leads straight outside where the cars are, and at night, it gets properly dark out there. No street lights, nothing. And once the sun is down, you're just sort of in it. But we had been there a couple of days at this point. And one night, probably around 11:30 or so, my grandfather had already gone to bed and my mum was on the couch scrolling on her phone. I was sitting off to the side doing the same. And then we both heard the back door open. Not a slam and not a bang, but just that slow creak like someone pushing it in carefully. We both looked straight toward the laundry. No talking, just that look like, "Did you hear that?" Then came footsteps. They started from the laundry and moved through the house exactly how someone would walk it, past the kitchen, across the open floor, toward the front area. The sound was heavy, like boots on wood. Not quick either, slow, spaced steps. There was also breathing. Not loud, but definitely enough to notice it. Like someone who'd just walked a long distance, maybe, and the steps stopped right near where my mum was sitting. We didn't move, just kind of locked in place. I remember looking at her and she had this same expression that I did, like we both knew that this wasn't normal but didn't want to be the first to say anything. After maybe 10, 15 seconds, we got up and we went to go and check the laundry. The door was closed, but we still locked it anyway. We did a quick look around the house, but there was nothing there. No footprints, no sign anyone had actually come in, nothing. We didn't tell my grandfather in the end. He's older and probably wouldn't have handled it well, or maybe even just brushed it off completely. That night, though, I barely slept. The next day, Mum went around doing her thing, burning stuff, saying prayers, or whatever it was that she was doing. I'm not really into that personally, but she was clearly shaken, which really is not like her. I've stayed there a couple of times since then, including alone. That's where things got worse for me personally. When I stayed alone, I slept up in the loft there, and you can see down into the main living area from there. The first night, I kept the lights off and just tried to ignore everything, but at around 2 in the morning, I started hearing movement downstairs. Not clear footsteps like before, more like shifting weight, I would say. Like the floor creaking in spots where someone could be standing still rather than walking. At one point, I looked over the edge. I didn't see anyone, but I did see something that didn't really line up right. There was sort of a shape near the kitchen area, but I couldn't really make it out exactly. The height and the posture were a bit strange, too tall for where the ceiling dipped slightly, and the way that it was positioned didn't match how a person would really stand, but it sort of looked like it was leaning forward but still upright at the same time. I watched it for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it. Then it moved. Not a normal step, too. More like it shifted its whole body sideways without adjusting its legs properly. It did not look like a natural movement at all. I went straight back from the edge and I didn't look again. After that, I put headphones in and I didn't take them out until morning. The next time that I stayed there, I blocked the loft opening with a blanket so I couldn't see downstairs at all. Still heard things though, like low talking but no actual words that I could make out. It wasn't constant, but just enough to keep you from settling. And well, after this, I don't stay there alone anymore. Now, the other part of this that really added to it all is that in early 2024, I spent a month somewhere nearby, and I was staying near a river that locals don't like being around at night. My girlfriend at the time lived across it, so we had to cross a bridge pretty regularly. Every time we crossed after dark, she would get tense as well. Not joking around either, but actually anxious. I asked her about it, and she said that people avoid that stretch because of things that have happened there in the past. I spoke to an older woman who lived near the river. Limited English, but enough to understand each other, and she told me straight up that she sees things near the water at night and doesn't really question it anymore. Said that during the war, bodies apparently ended up in that river. While I was there, I didn't see anything clearly like at my grandfather's place, but I did notice the same kind of feeling, I guess you could say, like your body picking up on something before your brain really does. Just a heavy, uneasy feeling for no obvious reason. One night, though, riding back over that bridge, I glanced down toward the water and I saw something moving along the bank. It looked like a person at first, but the way that it moved really didn't match walking. It was slow to the ground, then upright again, then gone behind some brush. It could have just been an animal, I suppose, but it didn't move like one that I recognized. I didn't stop to check though, so I don't know, I can't be sure about that one. But between that and what happened back at home, I've stopped trying to fully explain all of this. I'm not saying that it's anything specific, I mean, it could be anything really, but that night with my mum, we both definitely heard those same steps, same breathing, same path through the house, and whatever I saw from the loft wasn't something that I could match to a normal person moving around downstairs either. I still go out to the property from time to time, just not overnight unless somebody else is there with me, because that's about as far as I'm willing to test it. I've never really written this out properly, but it still messes with me even now, so I'll just explain it straight. This was late 90s. I was a kid living with my grandmother in an old place. The house wasn't huge, but it had this one setup that always felt wrong. My bedroom, it had two doors. One normal door to the hallway, and another that went straight up into the attic. Not like a crawl space either. When you opened it, there was a full staircase going straight up. Steep, narrow wooden steps, no light up there, and if you stood at the bottom and looked up, it just sort of disappeared into darkness. You couldn't see the top from where you were. But my bed was against the same wall, maybe a couple of feet from the attic door. And at first, it was just noise. Heavy steps on the stairs, not like creaks, but actual weight, like someone was walking down slowly. It would come maybe about halfway down and then just sort of stop. It was like that every time as well. Just stop mid-stair like whoever it was paused. There were no footsteps going back up either, just silence afterward. This started happening when I was home alone. My grandma worked as a live-in carer, so she'd be gone like a couple of days at a time sometimes. It was just me and my younger brother in the house a lot. And then it escalated. One afternoon, broad daylight, I'm sitting in my room and the attic door handle starts turning. Not a shake from like loose fittings, but like someone on the other side actually trying it, slow and then harder. I didn't stick around to figure out what was going on. I ran straight out of the house and sat on the back steps until somebody came home. That also happened more than once. Another time I went to take a shower and I made sure the attic door was shut before I left the room. I got into the habit at some point, but when I came back, the door was fully open. Not cracked, but wide open. Nobody else was inside. My brother was outside at the time. But I didn't even go back in properly. I just grabbed what I could and I left. The worst one, though, that's the one that stuck with both of us. So one morning before school, I was getting ready and my little brother was in my room, messing around with some old tapes or something. We were both in there, nothing unusual going on, when, out of nowhere, he just sort of bolts. No warning, no yelling first. He just sprinted out of the room, through the house and straight out the back door. Didn't stop to grab shoes, didn't look back, nothing. Obviously, I followed him outside, but he was already gone down the street. We didn't find him ourselves. Police picked him up a few miles away, barefoot. He had a fever by the time that they brought him back, which didn't make sense because he was completely fine earlier that morning. He didn't explain what had happened right away. In fact, it took years before he even said anything about it. After that day, I was done sleeping in that room, though. Couch, floor, anywhere else but there. If my grandma was home, I'd sleep in her room as well. Eventually, she asked me why, and I told her straight. Something was coming down from the attic when she wasn't there. What I didn't expect was her reaction. She didn't laugh it off, didn't argue, and just went really quiet. Later on, when I was older, she admitted that she had heard things too. Not the same as us, but enough that she didn't like going near that part of the house at night. She had someone come over, a church guy apparently, and they went through the house saying prayers, doing their thing. After that, the activity did drop off a bit. Not completely gone, but definitely not as frequent. Anyway, I moved out as soon as I could when I got older. And here's the part where my brother eventually told me. So years later, he said that when he was in my room that morning, he heard the steps coming down the attic stairs, same as I used to. But this time, they didn't stop halfway. He said that two figures came down. He described them as looking like people at first glance, but wrong when you looked properly. He said that the faces just didn't look clear to him, just kind of flat and hard to focus on. He said that they walked straight up to him, grabbed him, and lifted him off the ground. Not violently, but just like he weighed nothing. Held him there for a few seconds, and then dropped him. And as soon as his feet hit the floor, he just ran. He swears, too, that that's exactly what happened. And knowing how he reacted that day, I really don't think that he made it up. I never saw anything like that myself personally, just heard the steps, the handle, and the door. But I will say this. Those footsteps never sounded like a normal person using stairs. The spacing was always wrong. Too even and too heavy, like something placing weight without adjusting properly. I'm in my 40s now, and I still think about that house. Every now and then, I'll drive past it when I'm in the area too. Nothing looks different from the outside. It still looks the same. But even driving by, you get that same feeling. Like you just really shouldn't be there for too long. I don't dream about monsters or anything like that. It's always the same setup to me. Me sitting in that room, hearing something come halfway down those stairs and then stopping. And always just waiting there. So this isn't my story directly. It's from someone that I knew pretty well. I've heard it a few times over the years and the details never changed, which is why it always stuck with me. So this happened around 2018 when she was doing a semester abroad. She was sharing an apartment with two other students in one of these older concrete buildings. You know the ones. Long hallways, thin walls, and one elevator that took way too long to get to you. She wasn't the type to get spooked easily either. Pretty practical person, not into ghost stuff at all. And one night, she stayed late at the university library. It was raining pretty hard that night, like constant heavy rain, not just a light shower. She missed her usual tram and had to take a later bus, unfortunately. And by the time that she got off near her building, it was already after midnight. The street wasn't empty, there were still some people around. Cars going past, normal city noise. But when she started walking faster toward her building to get out of the rain, she said that she heard footsteps coming from behind her. Not random steps too, but paced exactly with hers, like somebody was trying to close the distance without being noticed. She stopped and turned around, thinking that someone might be there, but there wasn't. Not even someone walking away. Just a couple of people further down the street doing their own thing. She brushed it off as maybe echo, and she went inside. Now, this is where it starts getting weird in a way that's really hard to explain. You see, she gets into the building, heads to the elevator, presses the button. When it arrives, she steps into it and hits her floor. The door should close almost straight away, but for some reason they didn't. They stayed open longer than normal, like something was stopping them. But there was nothing in the doorway. She even leaned forward slightly, thinking that maybe the sensor was picking something up, but still nothing. Eventually the doors closed on their own and the lift went up. When it reached her floor and opened, she said that she had that same feeling again, like someone was right behind her. Not just a feeling either. She said that she could hear it. Footsteps again, same pace, right on her timing. She stepped out and immediately turned around, but the lift was empty, door still open, no one inside and nobody stepping out. At that point, she started walking faster down the hallway, a little bit spooked. It's a straight corridor, maybe 10 to 15 doors along it, and she could hear the steps again behind her, matching her exactly. She stopped again and turned again. There was nothing. This happened 2 or 3 more times in that short walk. Every time that she moved, it sounded like something moved with her. Every time that she checked, there was nothing there. By the time that she got to her apartment door, she said that her hands were shaking enough that she struggled with the key. She got inside, shut it properly, locked it, and just stood there listening. No footsteps in the hallway anymore. No movement, just quiet. She checked the whole apartment too. Rooms, bathroom, kitchen. Her flatmates were both out of town that night, so she was alone. And after a bit, she started calming down. Probably just stress, late night, bad weather, all that. Then somebody knocked on the door. 2 knocks, clear and deliberate. Not loud, just like normal knocks, but like someone knew that she was there. She froze and didn't answer straight away. Then she asked who it was. There was no reply. She checked the peephole. Empty hallway. There was no one standing there and nobody walking away that she could see. She waited maybe 20-30 seconds thinking that maybe they moved out of view, but no one ever showed up. She actually picked up her phone at that point and was about to call building security when it happened again. 2 knocks, same pattern, slightly louder this time. She went straight back to the door and checked again, but there was still no one there. No sound of footsteps leaving, no elevator noise, and nothing. At this point, she is properly panicking, not just scared, like full-on physical reaction, shaking, breathing weird, all that. She called security from the building intercom though, and also started dialing the police on her phone. While she's on the call, it happens again. 2 knocks, but this time there was a voice. She said that it sounded like a man, but not normal speech. Almost like someone repeating something that they'd heard somewhere else. Not shouted, not whispered either, just clear enough to hear through the door. She said that that's the point where she just dropped to the floor. She didn't black out completely right away, but she couldn't move or respond properly for some reason. The security guy showed up first. He checked the hallway, the stairs, even went floor to floor, but there was no one. Police came after that and did a more thorough check. Same result. No sign of anyone messing around. No reports from any other tenants. Nothing on the entry camera showing someone following her in or anything. But you definitely see her turn around a few times as if somebody is there. Now, here's the part that's always stuck out to me when she told it later. You see, the building had cameras at the main entrance and near the lifts. Security reviewed it with her the next day, and she walks in alone, stands at the elevator alone, gets in alone, doors stay open for longer than usual, noticeably longer, but there's nobody else entering. And when the lift reaches her floor, the camera in the hallway shows the door open and her stepping out. No one behind her, no delay, no shadow, nothing of that sort. And after she goes into her apartment, no one is seen walking up to her door at any point before the knocks happen, but you clearly hear the knocks. After that night, she didn't stay there alone again, either stayed with her friends or made sure that one of her flatmates was back. She also started using the stairs instead of the elevator, even though it was slower. Nothing like that ever happened again while she lived there, but she said that one thing never went away. Every now and then, especially late at night, she would sometimes hear knocks somewhere in the building. Not always her door, sometimes faint, like from another floor, and obviously that could just be normal, like people visiting or whatever, but still, she was always freaked out by it. She moved out as soon as her lease ended anyway, and she doesn't talk about it much now, but the one detail that she always repeats the same way is that timing. 2 knocks every time and same spacing. And she always says that the fact that whatever was making that noise never once showed up on the other side of the door was always a bit troubling to her. This all started last year, when me and my girlfriend were living in a small apartment complex in Columbus. The layout matters a bit too, so bear with me here. It wasn't one big building, more like a loop of smaller buildings facing inward, with a shared driveway in the middle too. Behind the buildings, there's a strip of trees. Not a proper forest or anything, but enough that once you step into it, you cannot really see the apartments anymore. Now, we had a routine where we would drink at night and then go for a walk around the complex before going to sleep. We never left the area, just circled around the buildings really. The night that this happened, we'd been talking about something heavy before going out. Not arguing, but definitely emotional. She's had stuff going on for a long time that she doesn't really get past, and we were talking about it again that night. Anyway, we go outside and we're talking, joking a bit, normal stuff. And at some point, I start walking backwards, so I'm like facing her while we talk. We end up near one of the buildings that has a small back parking area. That part of the walk barely has lighting, maybe one weak light and a couple of cars usually parked there. And while I'm walking backwards, I hear a woman say, "Hey." Not loud and not quiet either, but just like someone trying to get your attention sort of thing. I obviously assumed that somebody was out there, maybe another person walking around or heading to their car. I didn't really feel nervous or anything. I looked past my girlfriend into the dark area trying to see who it was, but I couldn't make anything out. So I said, "Hey," back. Twice actually, because I thought that maybe they didn't hear me at first. Now, this all happened pretty quickly, but my girlfriend hadn't even turned around yet. She was still focused on me. Then she finally looks behind her, and the second that she does, her whole face just changed, like immediate panic. No hesitation, and she just turns and literally runs. I didn't ask anything, I just ran with her. We didn't stop until we got back to the front of the building. She sat down on the steps trying to catch her breath, and I asked what the heck just happened. She said that there was something standing in the parking lot behind her, not moving toward us, but just standing there. And she described it as looking like a person shape-wise, but completely wrong. Way too tall for how thin it was, and she said that the skin looked completely white, like no color at all. The part that got me was what she said next, though. She said that it turned its head toward us, but not in a normal way, more like it snapped into position instead of moving naturally. I didn't see anything myself personally, I only heard the voice. We went back inside and we locked the door, and just tried to make sense of it all. At the time, I sort of leaned toward it being somebody messing with us, maybe someone standing in the dark, maybe lighting made them look weird or something. Maybe we were both just sort of off because we'd been drinking. She didn't agree, though. She thought that it was something attached to her. She had moments before where she thought that she saw things out of the corner of her eye, but I'd never experienced anything with her, well, until that night. But after that, we stopped doing those walks altogether. Nothing major happened again while we lived there, but she would occasionally say that she felt like someone was watching her when we were outside at night. We moved out a few months later. Different part of the state, new place, new setup. I honestly forgot about the whole thing. Then, more recently, I went out of town for a couple of weeks to visit some family near Asheville. She stayed behind, crashing at a friend's place while we were sorting out another move. And that's when she told me something that she had never mentioned before. For about a week, she said that someone had been coming up to the living room window at night and just standing there and looking in. Not knocking and not trying to get in, but just standing close enough that you could tell that something was there, but not clear enough to see the details. She said that it looked like a shadow most of the time. I immediately assumed that it was an actual person. I mean, that's the logical answer, right? So I told her to call the police if it happened again. But she said something that really bothered me. She said that it would only stay for a bit and then leave, and that it always showed up around the same time each night. She never called anyone because it stopped on its own after about a week. But then, a couple of days after telling me that, she said that she saw something inside of the house, just briefly, like something leaning around a corner watching her, then pulling back. She only saw part of it, but she said that it looked pale, same kind of white that she described from that night at the apartments. At that point, I went back and read what I had written about the original incident, and that's when it started lining up in a way that I really didn't like. I still don't fully buy into anything paranormal, I guess you could say. I mean, at the very least, I would rather it be a person, a creepy one, but still something real and something that you can deal with. But here's the issue. Different location, different house, different surroundings, and she's describing basically the same thing without trying to connect it herself at first. Also worth noting is that nobody else at her friend's place has seen anything. No neighbors reported something lurking around, no signs of someone trying to break in or anything. Right now, nothing is actively happening, which I'm grateful for. She hasn't seen it again since the last time inside of the house. We don't really talk about it much because, well, there's just not much that we can really say about it or do about it. I cannot prove anything. She's not the type to exaggerate stuff like this, though, I guess. If I had to land on something, I'd still say that there's probably a normal explanation. Someone outside that first night, maybe stress, maybe lighting playing tricks, maybe even someone watching the house later, which is kind of creepy when you really think about it. But the timing, the repetition, and the fact that I heard someone that wasn't really there when I checked, that part I struggle to explain cleanly. So yeah, that's really it, and I'm not saying it's anything specific, but I'm just putting it out there because it's one of the few things that I haven't been able to write off, properly at least. So this happened when my partner and I were doing a lot of camping trips. We weren't new to it either. We'd been doing regular trips for years in all kinds of weather. We were also pretty comfortable being out in the middle of nowhere. We heard about a smaller campground on the west side of an island, but sort of out of the way, not a major touristy spot. That's usually what we go for anyway, less people and quieter. We timed it around a long weekend thinking that it would be busy at first and then clean out after, and that's pretty much exactly what happened. The first day there was a handful of other campers scattered around, families, a couple of older couples. The weather turned overnight though, and it was proper heavy rain, wind picking up and everything. By the next morning, we noticed people packing up early, and by midday, the place was basically empty. And I mean completely empty. No cars left, no movement anywhere, just us two. We stayed anyway though, we camped in worse conditions. We spent the next couple of days just doing normal stuff as well, walking tracks, cooking, hanging around the site. No issues really. But it was the last night is when things really changed. So the rain came back hard again that evening, plus a storm was rolling in. We stayed close to the tent, cooked early, packed everything away properly. No food left out, nothing that would attract animals. That's important too, because that's the first thing that we checked later. Anyway, we went to bed earlier than usual that night, because there really wasn't much else to do in the rain. At some point during the night, though, I woke up. No idea what time it was. The storm had moved off a bit, but there was still lightning off in the distance. And every time that it flashed, it lit up the outside of the tent enough to see shapes, trees, the table, our gear for instance. I was sort of just laying there watching it for a bit. My partner was asleep, didn't move. And then I just got this feeling. Not like I'm scared straight away sort of thing, but more like something just wasn't right. It ramped up pretty quickly too, and then I noticed movement outside. At first, I thought it was just trees moving in the wind, but the pattern didn't really match. It was controlled, something moving across the campsite. Every time the lighting flashed, I could see it again, slightly closer as well. It looked like a person at first glance, but they were huge. Shoulders, though, were really narrow. But the shoulders were really narrow, which was weird. It wasn't running or walking properly either, more like stepping without shifting weight the way that a normal person would. I tried to wake my partner, but I couldn't move properly all of a sudden. Not fully frozen, but like my body just wasn't responding right. I could move my eyes, shift slightly, but not sit up. The thing kept moving around the tent. Not random either. It did a full pass around us, stopped at one side for a few seconds, then moved again. The closest that it got was right near the entrance too. And this is the part that I still can't line up with anything normal. So it didn't unzip the tent or touch it in any way from what I could see, but from my angle, during one of the lightning flashes, it looked like part of it was inside of the tent. Not fully, but like it was overlapping the edge. I remember focusing on that, trying to make sense of it, and then after that, I don't remember anything. In fact, the next thing that I know, it's morning time. The rain had stopped, my partner was outside already cooking, and I got up and told him straight away what I saw. He didn't take it seriously at first, said that it sounded like a dream or one of those half-awake states sort of thing. I pushed it a bit though, because it didn't feel like a dream. I mean, I've had bad dreams before, and this really wasn't the same. He didn't argue, but he didn't agree either, just kind of brushed it off. I still felt off though, like not just scared, but unsettled in a way that didn't go away, like a sense of dread was sitting deep in my stomach. We ended up packing up that day instead of staying any longer, and a few months later, it came up again randomly, and that's when he admitted something. So, he said that he woke up that same night as well. Didn't see anything at the time because he thought that it was just his imagination, but he saw something moving outside too, apparently. Same general shape and same kind of movement. He said that he didn't get the can't move feeling like I did, but he stayed still and watched it for a bit, then apparently went back to sleep thinking that it wasn't real. When I told him my version in the morning, that's when he realized that it lined up way too closely. We went over the practical stuff after that. No footprints, but, I mean, the ground was soaked from hours of rain, so anything would have been wiped away anyway. No missing food, no damage to gear, no other campers around who could have been messing with us that we knew of anyway. Also, no torchlight, no sound of someone walking normally, no voices and nothing like that. If it was a person, then they were moving in a way that didn't really match normal movement and didn't interact with anything around them. We still camp now, just not in places that are isolated anymore. And I don't think about it all the time, but when I do, I keep coming back to the same issue. It wasn't just one of us. Two people waking up separately and seeing something in the same spot, moving the same way at the same time. That's not coincidence. I haven't been able to figure out exactly what I think of it all or come up with any sort of explanation, but we never went back to that campground either. Not really because we think that something's there permanently, but just the feeling that we get when we think about that place, well, it's certainly not good. So my partner and I were doing some camping runs, and this one came from a recommendation through his family. One of his relatives kept going on and on about this remote spot, said that it was quiet, good fishing, hardly anyone goes that far out. While we were talking about it, his aunt basically cut in though and said that she hated the place. Not in a joking way either. She said that from the moment that they drove in that she felt off and didn't want to leave the tent the whole time. She couldn't explain why, but just said that the place just didn't feel right to her. We didn't take that too seriously. People get weird feelings in the wilderness all the time, right? Well, the drive, it was longer than expected. Once you turn off the main road, it's just dirt track for ages. No reception, no lights, nothing. We ended up arriving late because we took a wrong turn earlier on as well, and so by the time that we got close, it was fully dark. Only thing lighting anything was the headlights and a really bright moon. You pass a stretch before the campground though, where there are a few old buildings, some still used as holiday cabins, most just sitting there empty though. Not a full ghost town or anything, but clearly not active either. Anyway, we set up quickly and didn't explore that night. We ate, we cleaned up, and we went to sleep. The next day we walked around properly. The place was basically empty. I think that we saw maybe one other car the entire time that we were there, and it wasn't near us by any means. Our side was near the water though, a bit off to the side from the main area. Everything was pretty normal as well during the day. At some point though, that afternoon, my partner sort of wandered off to fish for a little bit. When he came back, he had this metal pot with him, not small either, one of those heavy black cooking pots. Looked old, like it had been sitting out there for years. So I asked where he got it from, and he said that it was near the edge of the water, half buried in mud. I told him that he probably should have left it there, but he just shrugged it off and put it out near our gear. Now, nothing happened straight away after that, which is why I didn't connect it at the time, but later on we both had a nap in the tent and I woke up first. I could hear someone moving around outside, footsteps close to the tent. Not animals, way too steady and too deliberate for that, so I assumed it was him, and I didn't react right away. But then I heard him shouting. Not panicked screaming, but loud like he was trying to get somebody's attention, saying stuff like, "Hey, and what are you doing there? And this is our site." That's when I sat up properly. The way that he was talking, it wasn't casual. It sounded like he was dealing with someone who wasn't responding. I started getting up to go out, but before I unzipped the tent, he came back in. He looked off, not terrified, but confused and certainly a bit shaken. He told me that there was a guy standing near the water, not doing anything aggressive, but just sort of standing there and stepping into the lake like he was searching for something. There was no reaction when spoken to, no turning around, no answering. Now, it was pretty cold at the time, not freezing, but definitely jacket weather. The guy apparently had no proper gear on, no jacket, no shoes that he could see clearly anyway, just walked straight into the water like temperature didn't even matter. He tried calling out again, louder, but nothing, no acknowledgement at all. Then the guy just walked back out and headed away from the site. Didn't rush, didn't look back, just left. My partner said that he was going to follow him just to make sure that it wasn't someone lost or in trouble or whatever. I told him not to though, but he went anyway. He was gone maybe 10 minutes, and when he came back, he said that he couldn't find anyone. But not just that. There was really nowhere that the guy could have realistically gone in that time without making noise or being seen at least. There were only a couple of other campsites in that direction, and they were empty. No cars, no gear or anything. Also, there were no tracks leading off clearly. The ground near the water was soft, so you would expect footprints, but between the damp soil and the debris, it wasn't obvious enough to track. We sort of both went quiet after that. At that point, it stopped being maybe we imagined something and turned into there was definitely something here and now they're gone. We packed up some of our stuff that evening just in case we decided to leave early as well. Nothing else happened that night, but neither of us really slept properly. The next morning, though, we had a look around the area in daylight. Tried to find where the pot came from, too. Couldn't find anything that looked like an old campsite or a structure nearby. We ended up leaving that day instead of staying any longer, too. On the drive out, we passed back through the section with the old buildings. One of them had a small group of people just sort of outside doing some maintenance work. My partner actually stopped and asked if anyone else had been camping near the lake or anything that they had seen. They said no. One of them mentioned, though, that occasionally people wander through from further out, but it's rare and you'd normally hear vehicles or see signs of it at least. We didn't mention the details and we just left it at that. But looking back on it all, the timeline just doesn't really work. From when we first saw the guy to when he disappeared, there just wasn't enough time for someone to walk far enough to be completely gone without making noise. Also, the lack of response. I mean, even if someone didn't want to engage, you'd at least get some kind of reaction when someone's yelling directly at you from a few meters away, surely. I really don't know what to make of it. I mean, it was a really weird situation. Either way, though, we left the pot behind when we packed up, didn't take it with us. And hey, call us superstitious, but I just didn't feel like it was something worth bringing home after all of that. I was about 10 years old when this happened and living in a very rural part of the country. Not a town really as well, but just sort of a handful of houses spaced out and farmland and forests around for the most part. Our closest neighbor was directly across from our place though, and the next neighbor was about maybe a mile away. Beyond that, it was just dense forest pretty much everywhere. No shops, no schools, nothing. Nothing but dirt tracks and trees as far as you could see. We didn't have a TV at the time, and there wasn't much in the way of entertainment at home. My siblings and I, we mostly read, played with toys, or rode our bikes. We had a couple of yard dogs, both pretty alert, and I never remember feeling unsafe around here. For years, too, it was pretty quiet, almost too quiet, in fact, but here's some background about me. I've always had weird experiences with things that I just cannot explain. As a kid, I occasionally had things like whispers when nobody was there, light touches, or objects seeming to move. Nothing terrifying most of the time, but just a bit odd, I guess you could say. And I never really sorted out either. It was always just there. Now, one afternoon I was outside, watching the dogs run around the yard, when I saw someone jogging down the dirt road. He was a man, white, wearing shorts and a t-shirt, running toward the dead end of the road. I'd never seen him before. The dogs, they didn't bark or react at all, too. My mum didn't see him either, and didn't know who I was even talking about when I mentioned him. I didn't think too much of it at first, but a few days later I saw him again jogging the same way. This time I grabbed my bike and I followed him for a little bit. I stayed a little ways behind, quiet, almost frozen with a mix of fear and curiosity. And the weird thing was that I didn't hear any footsteps, nothing while he was running. Just the soft sound of the tires on the dirt road that I was riding my bike on, and he didn't turn his head or acknowledge me in any way. The road ended, though, in a tall, sort of overgrown grass area that reached about mid-thigh. The man just ran straight into it. And here's the really strange thing. So, there was no rustling, no sound, and nothing moved around him when he did. He sort of seemed to glide through it almost. My instinct screamed at me to stop, but something made me keep going a little bit further. I got off my bike and I took a step toward the grass when I heard my mum's voice come from behind me, shouting, "Maggie." I spun around, but there was no one there. When I turned back to the grass, the man was now gone. Like, completely gone. I don't know if he just dropped down into the grass or what, but I could no longer see him anymore. But then my stomach dropped and, I don't know, I got scared and I ran home as fast as I could. My mum, though, was inside cooking and she hadn't left the house the whole time. After that, too, I never did see that man again. Even as a kid, though, I knew that what had happened wasn't normal. I felt like something had lured me out there, and it didn't want to be seen. I don't know if it was a ghost in a sort of typical sense either. Maybe more like an entity that I couldn't understand. Something that wasn't entirely human, maybe. Decades later, though, I went to see a psychic or a medium, and she said that apparently I had a guardian spirit protecting me, an older woman, not anyone that I know personally. She suggested that the moment that my mum's voice called me back was that spirit intervening, and I don't know how much of that is real, but it certainly fits, and so I can't just exclude it. Even now, though, thinking back about it, that whole situation still gives me chills. I still could not explain the man on the road, and I've never encountered anything like that again. It stayed with me all my life, too, because it was so weird, and I'm just grateful that something, whatever it was, made sure that I got back to my house safely. Every night, I take our dog Milo out for the final walk somewhere between 11:30 and 3 in the morning. Usually it's just me and him, the street is pretty much dead quiet, and the occasional car passes maybe once every 20 minutes. I've done these late night walks for years now and never had a weird experience. Well, until this night. It was early autumn, around 1:10 in the morning I would say, and Milo had just finished his business. We were turning around to head back home when I suddenly got that somebody is watching me feeling. It's hard to describe, but it hits your stomach first, then the rest of you. And if you've ever had this feeling, then you'll know what I'm talking about. Anyway, as we passed the cars parked along the street, I could see across the road to the house directly opposite of ours. That's when I noticed a figure. At first glance, I thought it was the neighbor, since he sometimes walks late too, but it didn't move like a normal person. This figure was extremely tall too, easily like 2.5 meters tall, and unnaturally thin. Even from a distance, I could tell the proportions were just really wrong. Here's the thing too, there's a streetlight in front of our yard that normally lights up the entire stretch there, including the neighbor's driveway. But this figure, it was almost like a black hole in the light. Not a shadow and not a dark coat or a hoodie or anything, but just absolute darkness. Everything else in the vicinity was illuminated normally, grass, trees, the parked car, but this thing was darker than anything else around it, even the night itself. Milo, who is usually oblivious to everything except other dogs and interesting smells, didn't even seem to notice it though. He trotted along like nothing was wrong, which honestly made the whole thing even creepier. I tried to rationalize it at first, thinking that maybe it was some kind of a visual trick, or maybe a person in a long coat blending into the shadows. But the closer that I got, the more that I realized that the figure just didn't reflect or scatter light like anything normal would. Its posture was upright, completely still, and focused directly on me. I could feel it watching me, in fact, even before I consciously saw it. Normally, I'd walk straight to our driveway before cutting through to the house, but that would have put me directly across the street from it. I didn't want that, and so instead I detoured through the neighbor's driveway to our side yard, keeping as much distance as I could. I kept glancing over my shoulder the whole time, and it never moved. Not a step, not even a slight shift. It just stayed there. By the time that I unlocked the door to get inside, I was shaking. Milo still didn't react. The thing across the street, it never seemed to move, never even made a sound. In the end, too, I sort of convinced myself that it must have been a trick of the light or my imagination, but I don't know, somewhere deep down, I knew that it wasn't. Since that night, I've walked the dog past that same street hundreds of times. I checked that exact spot every single time, too. Nothing ever happened again, and a part of me thinks that maybe that's even worse, because now I really don't have an explanation. What I have come to the conclusion of, though, is that it wasn't a person and it wasn't an animal, and there's no way that a human could have stood there without casting some kind of a shadow or reflecting any light. I've told friends about it, and most just think that I'm overreacting, but I keep remembering the way that it was just, well, existing there in the light, or maybe rather in the absence of it. Like I said, it wasn't like a shadow stretching. It was like the light itself avoided that space. I don't know what it was. It's the only experience in all of my late-night walks that makes me feel uneasy too, even now. I still take the dog out, as I mentioned earlier, but these days I keep my phone ready and I never take my eyes off of that part of the street. But has anyone else ever seen anything like this before? Something that seems alive, watching, but clearly isn't human? I'm serious too. I want to know if I'm going crazy or not, or if this is something else entirely. I don't usually get freaked out while hunting. I mean, I grew up in the outdoors, hiking, dirt biking, camping, all the time. Hunting has always been a part of my life too, and even when it's hot, buggy, or miserable, if it's season and I have a tag, well, I go. Not going just makes me grumpy and sort of irritable in the end anyway. This was opening day of whitetail season a couple of years ago. I hadn't scouted anything this year, but there was a public land spot that I found late season that I wanted to go and check out. My partner Ellie and I loaded up and headed in early afternoon. I had a rough idea of where I wanted to get set up, but I needed to find a good spot for her too. So I got her situated and then I headed to my own stand. I climbed my tree stand and started scanning. There was nothing out there. No tracks or droppings on the way in, no rubs, nothing. It was mid-afternoon though, 90 degrees, still air, and the mosquitoes were now relentless. I had forgotten my repellent too, which was annoying. So, sweat-soaked and irritated, I now felt like I was flailing more than hunting. The only sounds were the occasional bird and distant leaves rustling. Then I started hearing it. At first I thought it was dogs somewhere far away, but the sound kept repeating, long, low, drawn-out moans. It didn't match any animal that I knew of. Cows, maybe a bull? Too sharp. Deer? Wrong pitch. The moans seemed to come from at least two separate spots in the thicket as well. My gut told me to pack up before it got dark as well at this point. I quickly climbed down, slinging my stand over my back. I normally wouldn't leave this early, but for some reason I just felt a bit exposed that day. By the time that I reached the trail to Ellie, the sun was starting to dip and she was just crouched low looking behind her at a thick patch of bushes. I startled her when I appeared and gave some lame explanation about no deer signs and no bugs. We packed her stand and started back toward the truck, which was parked on a dirt road about 200 yards away. My stand clanked with each step. I didn't care. I was frustrated, hot, and uneasy, and that's when I heard it again. A sharp sort of whooping noise, and then a second one slightly different. I froze. This was not the wind or birds or anything that I'd ever heard before. Ellie heard it too this time, to which we couldn't place it. At first, I thought maybe somebody was calling deer dogs or something, but the pattern and the tone were just way off. It wasn't a normal hunting sound at all, in fact. Well, we kept walking, quiet as possible now. My stand's clanking masked some of it, but the whoops kept coming. They weren't random, too. They felt sort of measured, I guess. Enough that my hair was standing on my neck, and the dirt road was dry, no other tire tracks, no footprints, no sign that anyone else was even in the area, nothing but us. But when we reached the truck, we stayed in the cab for a while, trying to make sense of it. I spent the next day trying to figure out what it could have been as well. Birds, owls, feral animals, nothing fit. Then I watched a few videos online labeled Unknown Forest Whoops. and it almost sounded identical to what we heard. Even Ellie's reaction was the same as mine, pure disbelief and a little bit of fear as well. I sort of went down a bit of a rabbit hole, and eventually I found Bigfoot noises. And I swear to you that that is exactly the sound that we heard. Now, can I say that that is exactly what it was, and did I ever really figure it out? Well, no. And I have hunted that area dozens of times since then, and I've never heard anything like it again. I also never saw tracks or signs of Bigfoot or anything else, but I will never forget that evening. Something was out there, just beyond the tree line, making sounds that didn't belong to any animal that I know. And in fact, upon hearing those recordings from other people, I am now convinced that we heard the same thing that they did. Whether that's Bigfoot or not, I don't know, but those sounds were identical. So, has anyone else here ever heard something like this while out hunting? Not the usual animal noises, or wind or branches or anything, but something else entirely, something like a Bigfoot whoop. Because if it's not human or animal, well then, I really don't know what it is. I've always done a lot of night photography, mostly astrophotography, so being alone at night is pretty normal for me. I used to think that I was pretty much fearless as well, but a few incidents over the past few years have made me really rethink that a little bit. So the first one happened back in 2019 on a spring night. I had my camera and tripod, and I decided to hike out to a spot that I knew, a wide, familiar trail about maybe a mile from the road. I often don't take a flashlight because I don't want to spook wildlife. They're easier to photograph if you stay in the dark after all. I also just like moving in darkness. It's quiet and I can focus better. I set up my usual vantage points near the water's edge and I started a long exposure. Everything was pretty normal as well until I heard some rustling off on the far side of the lake. I know the area well, but the sound was heavier and closer to the size of maybe a large dog. Then it started letting out these yells, deep, low, and almost guttural. Not like any animal that I knew in the area. It wasn't a distress call, too. It was sort of just a warning, I guess. It sounded angry and frustrated, though, like something big had been cornered or maybe even hurt. I froze at first, thinking that maybe it was a bull in pain, but then it repeated, and something about the tone made me stop thinking logically. I grabbed my tripod and camera bag, and I sprinted the mile back to my car, listening to the noises echoing across the water. Thankfully, it didn't chase me, and I never saw anything, but it was certainly loud enough to make my stomach tighten for hours afterward. I still have no idea what it was, and I mean, logically, it was probably just a large animal, but my gut says otherwise. Anyway, the second one happened a few months earlier, near the same area. My girlfriend at the time, Jess, and we went on a short hike along a straight stretch of track that cuts through dense forest. No moon that night, just completely black. We were about halfway in, too, when we noticed like a small glow high in one of the big trees there. At first, I thought it might have been a distant house or maybe a reflective sign or something. But that didn't make any sense. I mean, there was no light out there. But as we got closer, it was coming from inside of a knot of one of the trees, high up, bright and focused. There was no other light source nearby. We stared for a few minutes, both quiet. Jess said that she'd never seen anything like it before. I've walked that trail dozens of times, sometimes at night alone even, and never seen anything glow like that in the trees. We didn't stick around. It just felt very weird and off. On the walk back, I kept looking over my shoulder as well. No one was there, and we didn't see any lights moving through the forest or anything, but I just felt watched the entire way back. Now, the last one wasn't far from my house, in fact, in a clearing surrounded by thick forest. I was again out with my camera, photographing Orion, and I heard it before I saw it. 2 heavy thumps on the ground, like somebody stomping really hard. Then I heard it again, louder, closer, like something was running toward me almost. I instantly turned and I ran across the field to the house with my tripod swinging against my back, convinced that something was chasing me. My heart was pounding so hard that I thought it was about to burst, and I made it inside, slammed the door, and didn't breathe properly for a while. I then spent most of that night just looking out the windows, trying to see if anything was out there. What makes these experiences stick with me, though, is that I'm normally a pretty rational person about the outdoors. I mean, I know the local wildlife pretty well. I know the sounds that most of them make. I know how the wind carries noises at night, and I know how nightlife can sound like that. But these three events weren't things that I can really easily explain. They certainly weren't deer, and they're nothing that I've ever heard or seen before. Since then, I still go out for night photography from time to time, but I have a lot more respect for the forest now. I make noise and I stick to known trails. I always carry a light now as well, and I never go as far as I used to. There's something about the darkness in these forests, especially alone, that makes you realize that you're not the only thing moving around at night out there. And I guess that's really the part that has stayed with me the most. I work at a big retail store as a self-checkout host. Most of my days are spent walking laps and listening to customers saying things like, "I don't work here," or "Why aren't you on the register?" I understood their frustrations. Usually, there would be 2 or 3 of us at the self-checkout, and maybe 2 manned registers open. We got a new guy in. His name was Terry. Terry always wore a mask as it was 2021 and COVID was still COVIDing. I was training him, telling him to stock candy in bags and all that. He would ask questions anyone would ask, if I'm in school, if I have a girlfriend. I lived in a small city or big town that had a good college. Students from all over the country would come and usually wound up with prisons or retail. I usually asked the same questions too. I told him no on both accounts, and he then asked if I ever went hunting. We had a lot of woods and a big forest around town. No, I don't really like guns. He said that he'd have to take me one day though. A few days go by and he's over on my side again. He asks if I have any family in town, and if I did, do they live close? I live 3 doors down from my mum. He starts talking about hunting again, how he was out with his buddies and started using pack tactics, where they would box in the prey and finish off. Weird for deer, seeing as they flee at the first sound of any noise. He's off for a few days though, because new hires have problems getting hours for the first 3 weeks. I talked to one of my co-workers and they tell me that he asks a lot about me. The next time I see him, his questions are very telling. How tall would you say you are? How much do you weigh? How well do you know the woods past so-and-so street? I'm a pretty big guy at 6 feet and 300 pounds, and when he brought up hunting again, a creepy thought would send a chill down my spine. Come on, man, you'd like it. Just some good old boys shooting and stuff, late at night in the middle of the woods. But then, the real fun starts right before dawn. They won't know what hit them. The mask hid most of his face, but I could see it rise when he smiled. I don't know why he thought that that would be a great way to convince someone. Other than feeling like they were about to hunt me, it sounded like I would have been bored as heck out there. I must have made a face or something because he turned and walked away pretty quickly. I told a couple of co-workers about it, but that was really the last day. I never saw him again after that because he just left and never came back. And honestly, I'm kind of grateful for that. This took place when I was 15 or 16 years old, so that would place it in either the summer of 2000 or 2001. My family and I were visiting with my cousin's family in Norfolk, Virginia. My brother and I We're close in age with our cousins, and I stayed in my younger cousin's room with him and my brother in my older cousin's room. The bedrooms, they were at the end of a hallway. My brother's room was at the end of the hallway, my bedroom was across from my aunt and uncle's bedroom, and my parents, they stayed at the opposite end of the house in the den. So, it had been many years since we'd seen each other, so the first night my cousin and I stayed up after lights out to talk and just catch up. During our hours of conversation, he casually told me that the house was haunted by a woman. He had a reason why they thought that it was a woman, but I've since forgotten that. He told me, though, that the lights would go out unexpectedly from time to time, and there'd be strange noises late at night, and the most common happening would be that the TV in the den, it would turn on in the middle of the night without explanation. I was intrigued by this story. Our conversation moved on to other topics eventually, but in the early hours of the morning, we were still talking when suddenly there was a loud, heavy-sounding bang that sounded like it came from the kitchen. We fell silent and listened as we heard what sounded like footsteps, slowly coming down the hallway towards the bedrooms. The floors were hardwood, and to me, the footfall sounded like a small child that has put on their parents' shoes. They kind of slid and then the heel would slap the floor. They sounded like they stopped right outside of our bedroom door, in fact. There was silence for a long moment. Then 3 loud knocks, not on our door, but on my other cousin's brother's room door. We both sprang up from our beds and flung open the door. My brother and cousin had already had their door open and were standing there, but there was nothing there. We could all hear our father's infamous snoring coming from the other end of the house, while my uncle, hearing us all saying "what the heck was that" to each other, came out of his room to curse us out and send us off to bed. Needless to say, though, I really didn't sleep very well on that trip. I've dealt with paranormal experiences throughout my life, and I am now convinced that some kind of spirit follows my family from time to time. It usually just shows up as little shadows peeking around corners, or strange noises in the middle of the night. But there's one experience that still freaks me out to this day. I was younger when it happened. So, I was home alone with my younger brother. We had this little dog named Stephanie, a tiny ball of energy who was completely obsessed with Cheerios. We didn't give them to her often because they weren't the healthiest treat, but she loved them more than anything. That morning, I went to the pantry to grab some Cheerios for Stephanie. She was right there beside me, practically bouncing with excitement. I grabbed the box, turned around, and just like that, she was gone. I was so confused, thinking, what the heck? Where did she go? I immediately started searching the entire house, calling her name over and over. 2 hours went by, and still no sign of her. At this point, I was really worried. In a last-ditch effort, I grabbed her favorite squeaky toy, a little pig that she adored, and squeezed it. When out of nowhere, she appeared upstairs in the hallway, right in front of my brother's room. I could see her standing there from the main floor. Relief washed over me, but I was also confused as heck. I called out to her, "Come down here, I have your Cheerios and your squeaky pig toy." But instead of coming to me, she started walking back and forth, crying like she was stuck or maybe scared or something. I was baffled and getting a little bit scared myself at this point. I kept urging her to come to me, but her crying only grew louder and more desperate. So I started climbing the stairs, but the higher I went, the louder her cries became. I began to worry that she might be hurt or trapped, so I hurried up the stairs, my heart racing. When I reached the top, I suddenly felt something scratch down my back, 5 distinct fingers. I kid you not, it felt like a hand had just sort of clawed me. I screamed in shock and bolted towards Stephanie, who was still crying in front of my brother's room. My brother heard me screaming and burst out of his room, totally freaked out, asking what was happening. I told him that something had scratched me, and then out of nowhere, we both started hearing this loud banging on the walls. We were completely terrified, so without thinking, I grabbed Stephanie, and my brother and I ran downstairs to the solarium, which had a glass door. We shut it behind us, thinking that we'd be safe there, but then the banging started again, this time on the glass door itself. We could see through it, and I can assure you that there was no one there. It was just us, but the banging was relentless, echoing through the room. We were both sobbing by now, absolutely terrified. We called our mum, begging her to come home immediately, but she didn't believe us. She thought that we were just imagining things or trying to prank her. Later, when things finally calmed down, my brother checked my back, and sure enough, I had 5 scratch marks running down my skin. They weren't deep, but they were definitely there. And that was really the only time that I was ever physically attacked by, well, that spirit. It makes me wonder, too, if another one entered my home that day, because it's so odd and out of character that it just seems, well, different. I had an experience about 4 days ago that I haven't been able to shake. I was dog or house sitting for my boyfriend while he was away on a backpacking trip. My boyfriend's home is in a semi-remote area at the bottom of a hill at the back of a few arches of property. He's right next to the highway, which has opposite it a small rural neighborhood. It's both very sketchy and very safe, meaning that the community is close, but people frequently keep to themselves, and there's lots of abandoned, dilapidated homes right next to very well-kept homes as well. It's a pretty typical countryside neighborhood, I guess, but I really didn't feel unsafe to agree to watch my boyfriend's property and his dog, Hennessy. Hennessy is a 115-pound jet black American Bulldog English Labrador mix. He's basically all muscle, and ever since my boyfriend and I began dating, he's become very protective of me and my own dog, Lottie. Lottie is a 57-pound poodle mix. I'm a dog groomer, so she's usually done up in pretty silly haircuts with bows and everything. All of this is to say that one of my dogs is very intimidating, and the other certainly is not. Now, because of his strength, however, I cannot walk Hennessy and Lottie at the same time on my own, and so I usually walk Lottie alone and then go back to get Hennessy and walk him alone. We do about 30 minutes of walking each, and I like to take Hennessy after Lottie at night because I feel safer with him as it gets later. This is important too because this was the case about 4 nights ago. I was about 3/4 of the way through my walk with Lottie when I got this really weird feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I looked around to see that about 30 feet or so back, there was a tall man in a hoodie standing next to an older, rundown home. I instantly thought that the hoodie was a bit weird. I live in Northern California, and it's early August. It doesn't get colder than like 87 degrees in the evening, especially when the sun was still setting like it was at that time. I forced myself to brush it off though, as I tend to be fairly paranoid due to my years of reading scary stories. But as I kept walking, the sun kept setting and the streets began to slowly get darker. I would glance back from time to time and notice that the man was keeping pace with me, not breaking that 30-odd foot distance, but still. If I turned a corner, so did he. If I sped up, so did he. Finally, we reached the highway, and I crossed right before a car came speeding past, hoping that if the guy was following me, this would put some distance between him and myself, which thankfully it did. But that didn't stop him from continuing to follow me. I walked as fast as I could to the house, not wanting to turn around, but now being able to hear his footsteps on the gravel. At this point, Lottie had noticed him too and started to bark and growl a bit. I forced her to keep moving and thankfully made it back inside the house, slamming and locking the door, hoping that that was the end of it. But it was not. Moments after I'd shut and locked the door, I felt someone trying to open it. The dogs heard this too and started barking because they always do when someone is at the door. There's no peephole on my door, but I can talk to whoever is on the other side because it's a pretty thin door. So I yelled out and asked who was there. Through the barking, I could hear a man's voice. "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" For some reason, the way that he said it was just so creepy. It was like there was nothing behind it, kind of like he had rehearsed the line or decided to say it beforehand. I yelled back no and asked him to please go away. He paused for another second and then again said, "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" He starts trying the door handle again, this time pushing up against the door. By this point, Hennessy can tell that something is wrong, and so can Lottie. The hair on the back of Hennessy's neck is standing up, and he is gnashing his teeth while growling. At that moment, I don't know what possessed me, but I threw Lottie into the bathroom behind me and grabbed Hennessy by the collar, keeping him close to the door with me. He's still barking and going crazy, mind you. I hear the man repeat that he wants to meet my dog, and I yelled out leave, and he paused and then slammed into my door. I would say too that the door moved at that moment. I unlocked the door and opened it just wide enough that Hennessy could get about halfway out. He's going bonkers at this point. My hand is starting to hurt from holding him back, and I can hear his teeth clacking as he ferociously chomps toward the man. And well, this dude was not expecting Hennessy. He stumbled back, almost falling over, and cursed as he scrambled to stay off the ground. He didn't even look at me and instead booked it up the hill as fast as he could and out of sight. Eventually, I managed to pull Hennessy back in, and I called the cops to tell them what had happened. I never did get a good look at the guy, and they basically told me that there wasn't anything that I could really do, but they did take my statement and told me that they'd contact me if anything ever came of it. Honestly, though, I am so thankful for Hennessy. After all of that, I snuggled up with him and Lottie that night and cried because it had all hit me how terrifying that really was. I literally went out the next day and bought him the biggest bone that I could find from a pet store, nearly an hour away, because he definitely had earned it. I also got Lottie something too. I don't know why this creep didn't get the hint when I had two dogs barking inside, but my assumption is that he didn't really realize that he was hearing two barks, or assume that if I had two dogs that they were both like my puffy poodle. That is to say that he just wasn't afraid. I'm very thankful though that the guy didn't have a firearm, and looking back now, I probably should have called the cops and kept my door closed, to be honest. But I hope that maybe because he saw Hennessy, he'll know not to come back and mess with us, because if he does, this time I'll let my big sweet boy rip him to pieces. Ever since my grandfather, who lived with us, became sick, and after his recent death, my mother and I have noticed a drastic increase in unexplainable things happening inside of our house. I always tried to write it off, but this night, something happened that truly freaked me the heck out. For some context, we live in the province of Alberta, and our house was built in the 80s. To my mum's recollection, when she first bought the house 13 years ago, there was no reported deaths in the house or any history on the land that it sits on. To bring everything back to the beginning of these events occurring, in December of 2023, my grandfather injured himself going down the stairs and was hospitalized. In his absence is when we, and even my grandfather, who was in the hospital, realized that something had changed inside of our home. Only days after his hospitalization, both my mother and I repeatedly heard footsteps or movements downstairs in the basement. My grandfather's room is in the basement. Many times we chalked it up to just old house noises, wood creaking, the house settling, etc. Until more physical things started happening, like the downstairs bathroom sink running, washing and dryer machines being open when they were previously closed, doors being open which were previously closed, items that were once on shelves being found on the ground, entire filing cabinets of papers spilled on the ground, lights flickering and turning completely off when in a room. Once, the stereo or radio system we had downstairs randomly turned on and blasted the radio for a few seconds before turning off as I walked past. But those were all the things that happened inside the house. But what's even freakier, and what made the rest of my family worried, are two specific instances in my grandfather's hospital room. Once in front of my mother and aunt, and a second time with just my aunt in the room. The first time happened later in the day after dinner, when my mum and my aunt were there. My grandfather leaned into my mother's ear and whispered, "Who's that over there? Is that a nurse?" and pointed to the corner of the room. My mum was confused and told my aunt, and she too became confused because, obviously, no one else was in the room. They thought that it was just him seeing things because the nurse said that he wasn't all up there after his fall. The second time, though, was much more intense and left my aunt hysterically calling my mum over the phone late at night. She told my mum that my grandfather was starting to fall asleep when he just sort of jolted up with a horrified look on his face and quietly told my aunt that the devil himself was standing behind her. She freaked out and stood from her chair and turned and saw nothing. She calmed back down and sat back in her chair and tried to ease my grandfather. She said that he never calmed down and then loudly yelled, "He's trying to grab you." And my aunt said that she felt something touch her shoulder along with a breath on the back of her neck. She quickly called my mum soon after in a panic, and my mum advised her to go home for the night. And after that, there were no more incidences in the hospital. After that, there seemed to be less activity at our house until, well, he passed a few weeks ago. Since then, my mother and I continue to hear the odd sound, objects being misplaced, lights going on and off, in the basement, until about an hour ago, and my mum came into my room at about 10 p.m. and randomly asked if I just wanted ice cream. I said sure to that, and I went to the door to put my shoes on. My mum said that I didn't have to go if I didn't want to, so I chose to stay home in the end. As she left, she told me to lock the door behind her as I went to the bathroom as she left. I got out of the bathroom and promptly locked the door. I also want to note that our screen door wasn't locked but was definitely latched at the time. After I closed the door, I went back to my room and sat, and I just continued a game that I was playing with my headphones on. After about 10 to 15 minutes of my mum being gone, I very clearly heard my mum's voice yelling my name to come and grab the ice cream. I get up and speed walk to the door yelling, "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you get home." And as I turn the corner to the front door, the door is slightly ajar, screen door wide open, and my mum and her car are nowhere to be seen. I was quite spooked by that because the sound of my mum's voice was so loud that I heard it over the floor fan in my headphones. I relocated the door and locked myself in my room until my mum got home with the ice cream. I told her what happened, and she was also spooked, and we together searched the house in case somebody had actually got in, but there was nothing. I also forgot to mention that the majority of the time, our two dogs in the house never barked at anything, except for a few times in the basement, maybe 2 or 3 times. I really don't know how to end this because I'm just not a good storyteller, but the only upside is that we are moving soon, and hopefully this stuff won't keep happening in the new place that we're moving into. I worked security in 2019 to 2021. One place that I was working was a call center, and there was 24/7 guards on scene, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 1 overnight. On the overnight shift, there was no one else in the building, all doors were locked and all ID scanners were locked as well. I need you to understand that there was no one else in the building. There was no way anyone else could have been in the building with me. This happened in 2020 when everyone was working from home and the security team were the only people that were even in the building. So, at every odd hour, I would do a patrol around the building, check into all the rooms that I had to swipe at, and return back to the desk. Other than that, I'd sit there and watch the cameras and play my Switch. Now, one night, while I was there for the overnight shift and the other 2 guards had left, I had to go on patrol. The lights in the building were all out, and it didn't really matter that much because I could see enough with the lights from the parking lot, and I'd never been afraid to walk around alone there because really I enjoyed the job anyway. I walked through the downstairs, checked all the exits to make sure that they were locked, then all the staircases to make sure that they were empty. When I moved to the second floor, I heard one of the phones ringing out in the desks. Not unheard of, and because of the sensitivity of it all, we aren't allowed to touch the phones, except for the front desk ones, obviously. I usually played music to walk around, but this time I'd left my phone to charge at the desk. There was no device on me that could have made a sound. The phone had since stopped ringing, and I was still alone. As I moved to the final part of the building for my patrol, that was when I hear a small thud by the stairway at the back. That didn't bother me too much, but when I heard a female voice call out, "Help me," that was when I froze. I stayed silent, and I didn't move for nearly 15 minutes. It took me a while, but I eventually called out and asked if someone was there, but I didn't dare go over there to try and see. I would have heard something or saw someone moving over there if there had been anyone. I didn't finish my patrol that hour and immediately returned to the desk downstairs where the lights were on in the lobby. My boss even asked me when I told him about it, and he just nodded like, "Yeah, that happens sometimes." I didn't hear anything else the entire time that I worked there after that. I even checked the cameras that were in that area, and I can assure you that there was no one there. I always used to figure that ghosts were real, or I wanted to believe that they were, but that night completely proved to me that ghosts really are real, and when one asks for help, you probably shouldn't really risk yourself. It's Obon season in Japan, a week in which the spirits of the departed are believed to return to families and loved ones. As such, I'm curious to hear if anyone has had any experiences and encounters with spirits here, either in Japan or Asia. Here are some of what myself, as well as family and some friends, have experienced over the years. So my husband is a hard atheist and refuses to believe in the paranormal. He does have one story, however, that made him a bit spooked. You see, he grew up in a mountainous area with little tunnels running through the area so cars can access the more remote places. In many areas, there's a newer lit up and cleanly paved tunnel running directly beside an older and less used tunnel from decades ago. According to him, one day, he and his friends were playing down by a river and chose to head back home through an older tunnel. He went in ahead on his bike and saw a woman and her little girl walk in the opposite direction, towards the middle of the tunnel, and he passed by them without looking too closely. He turned to look back to see where his friends were, and the woman and the girl were nowhere to be found. The tunnel in question would take a solid few minutes to pass through on a bike, let alone on foot. I mean, I've personally walked through the tunnel, and though I didn't come across anything like this, the air gets very cold and heavy towards the middle, to be sure. I also have a co-worker that works at an elementary school about 30 minutes in the mountains. It's an older school, about 100 years or so old, but it's warm and inviting, and I've always felt pleasant when I visit. There's a little nook with couches in the staff room, and it opens to a huge 2-story hall with a hallway leading down to the lunchroom and kitchen areas. My co-worker has recently been seeing a lot of activity in the hall. More than once, he's walked out of the staff room and seen a man hunched over a table in the hall as if reading something. When he walks towards the man, he passes by a pillar and suddenly, the man is gone. He's also seen movement in the nook in the staff room, and lunch ladies often report a presence of a little child in the kitchen who asks them where the lunchroom is. This school has 6 teachers and 25 students, with everyone knowing everyone. The man and the child, though, are reportedly no one that anyone knows.
Now, I'm not apt to seeing ghosts, but I like to jokingly say that I was sensitive due to a lot of strange goings-on in my childhood home over the years. This came back to bite me, though, when I got a little bit overly cocky, I guess you could say, during some ghost stories in the town over, and I think something followed me home. So I used to live in Kagoshima, Japan as an English teacher back in 2018. My home was in a city nearby in a bright and warm 2-bedroom apartment that was 2 floors above another teacher's. My best friend lived nearby in a 2-towered apartment complex and below another teacher, Todd, so I would visit the area to stay over and hang out every once in a while. Once my best friend returned to the US, a new teacher, Ashley, moved in. But since my friend's apartment was being renovated, Ashley stayed in the apartment next door for a few months. That October, I took my little black car down and went to a barbecue dinner where Ashley, Todd, and some other friends were telling ghost stories. Ashley was visibly upset when it came time for her story, which was apparently true and happening currently, she said. She would hear walking around from Todd's apartment at late hours, and Todd had told her every time that he was out visiting his girlfriend at the time, so it clearly wasn't him. She also mentioned having horrible dreams about being stuck in her bed while her room filled with water as a ghost with long black hair stood outside of her window, as if demonstrating, "This is what I can do to you." Todd was backing up these claims, confirming the calls from Ashley and that he indeed was never around when they came. His brother, who is like a kind of medicine man or shaman in their community, apparently reached out to him out of the blue, saying that he had a dream that compelled him to draw a picture of what he saw. Todd pulls out the text of the picture his brother drew, and Ashley and myself also began freaking out at its sight. It was a picture of a white ghost with long black hair, crouched as if crawling on the outset balcony of an apartment. Ashley swears that it's exactly what has been appearing in her dreams, and all of us confirm unequivocally that the backdrop of this drawing is the exact building where Todd and Ashley live, the one where I'd visited my best friend dozens of times. Everyone is freaked out, but also sort of excited for some reason, like, oh boy, a real ghost situation, how fun for us. How naive we were, we came to realize. We decided to go back to Todd's place once we finished eating, and I felt a heaviness when I walked in. I told him immediately and seemed intrigued, but brushed it off as it's his apartment and he's got to be able to fall asleep there that night. I noticed that the same area that I felt heaviness was completely fine as I left to go home, but the entire solo drive back to my apartment was incredibly fear-filled and really tense, and I was afraid to look behind me as if I were going to see something in the back seat. I brushed it off as just my imagination, as I too had to be able to fall asleep that night, and proceeded to try and do so when I got home. Now, at 2:30 in the morning, I woke up drenched in a sweat with my arms and fists clenched so tightly around my head that I had lost feeling in them. There was a deep and dark heaviness all around me, and I just felt this overwhelming fear not to open my eyes. I'd never been one to have nightmares or sleep paralysis or anything, and I was completely awake as I remember being unable to fall back asleep and thinking like, oh no, I have work tomorrow, why the heck am I not sleeping at a time like this? The next morning though, I texted Ashley what happened and she freaked out saying that she didn't tell anyone this, but the exact same thing happened to her when she had the nightmares. She also asked me if I heard any wooden-like tapping coming from inside of my house, and I said yes. I noticed something coming from the corner when I got home, and I just chalked it up to the support beam settling. She gets even more worked up over this, saying that she didn't say anything about the corners, but that's where she heard the tapping as well. She and I messaged Todd immediately, asking if there was something his brother could do in this case, since apparently he had a dream about this happening too. Basically, he sent us over some symbols on paper and told us to burn them in the apartment to purify the space, and to leave one unburned to repel whatever it was. It took a few days during which I begged the teacher below me to let me stay with her, as my preciously warm and welcoming home felt suffocatingly heavy and dark in ways that I still struggle to explain. And it took about 3 days to arrive, and until then, the tapping continued in corners of my room. In the meantime, I discovered what appeared to be handprints on the inside of my car's rear window after that drive home, which normally wouldn't be possible as I drove a Daihatsu Move at the time and it was far too small for anyone to fit in the back. A disconnected phone line also rang at 8:15 p.m. one day, which my then boyfriend was there to witness. Once the papers with written symbols arrived, we burned them as told and the heavy atmosphere cleared up immediately. There's no interesting ending to this story other than that it hasn't bothered us since. But to this day, I have one of those symbols laminated as protection, so it stays far, far away. I've also stopped going to places said to be hosting frightening spirits because I've wisened up with time and experience. Again though, like I said at the beginning, I'm interested to hear of any other experiences had either here in Japan or around Asia as well. When I reflect on my childhood, I have a reoccurring memory that always baffles me. I remember one day, I was about 5 or 6, I was at home alone with my mum while she napped. I don't have an exact memory, but I recall sitting on the couch in our living room and looking up, and in front of me was a massive, praying mantis-like creature. It was so massive that it filled the entire room. I'm talking like 8 feet tall at least. I don't really recall it moving much, if at all, but I went into freeze mode and felt like I shouldn't make any eye contact. I felt like I couldn't move and was paralyzed by fear. I sat there, trying to be as still as possible for a couple of minutes. I knew distinctly that this was not a dream, too. My childhood brain could only process it as being an extremely large bug, but I felt incredibly confused by just how large it was. I remember kind of just thinking that it wasn't something particularly strange and must have been something that I just hadn't learned the existence of yet. However, I knew that I was scared. Eventually, I mustered up the courage to run upstairs and ask my mum for help. I woke my mum up and told her that there was a massive praying mantis downstairs. She, of course, just thought that it must have been a normal-sized bug. She comes downstairs and, obviously, it was gone. I remember being too stunned by its disappearance and almost embarrassed to tell her what I had actually seen and how strange it was. I remember feeling very confused and trying to understand how my imagination could have possibly generated something that felt so real. Later in life, I had a friend, her name was Eve, that did mushrooms with a bunch of friends. She had a difficult experience with how some of her friends responded to the substance. Eve was essentially supposed to be their guide, but Eve couldn't figure out how to assist the others, and it was as if the others had forgotten how to breathe at one point. Eve said that she was suddenly greeted, though, by a praying mantis, who were somehow giving her advice on how to help the situation. The advice resulted in Eve being able to resolve the problem, too. So, if anyone has any feedback or theories on this, then I would love to hear them. I've always been very confused by it all, and, to be honest, I still don't know what to think of it. Something really strange has been happening lately, and I know I'm not crazy because friends of mine have experienced this with me on 2 separate occasions. But I swear that I'm teleporting across town somehow. This has happened to me 3 times, and it's seriously starting to freak me out. It happened for the 3rd time less than an hour ago. I was riding on my friend's car back to my place from a movie theater on the opposite side of town, a trip that would normally take around 15 minutes. It took us 5, and I noticed what had happened almost immediately, but I didn't want to say anything until my friend, E, did out of fear of sounding crazy. On the drive, we randomly ended up downtown, close to my place, much sooner than we should have. The transition is so seamless that I can't tell the difference until I see man-made landmarks like buildings. E mentioned that he didn't make any turns that he'd normally have to get there. We just sort of ended up there. We weren't distracted by a conversation or anything, and the both of us were stone cold sober. Then E started to freak out a little bit. I told him about the other 2 experiences that I'd had, more on those later, but we made it to my place and decompressed for a bit before he left. In the car, I told E about the other 2 events that I experienced. The first time I had something like that happen, I was walking to a gas station to grab a snack after work, I think, and somehow ended up walking on a street like a mile down the road. No time had passed at all, and I know this because I check my watch fairly often. The second experience was the more drastic of all 3 that I've had, though. I was in the car with another friend of mine, his name is Jay, and we were on our way to a Walmart, a 30-minute drive away from his place one morning, but we ended up getting there in 10 minutes. He noticed what had happened shortly after starting the drive over, and we took a turn into this more scenic road on my state, Virginia, which would be a straight path to North Carolina. But instead of us going towards North Carolina, we ended up in a very similar road much closer to that Walmart within a matter of seconds. The transition was nearly unnoticeable until, well, I saw buildings that I recognized from part of the town the Walmart is in. And that experience, it really freaked me out. I have no clue what's going on, and to be honest, I'm genuinely really scared. I don't know what's happening, and I want to find out, which is why I'm here. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Another thing too that happens, and this has been consistent with all 3 times, is that I, along with E and J, get this sort of horrible burning sensation in our lower chests, and we feel this awful sense of like uneasiness all of a sudden. Standing up after an experience like this feels like a burden, and walking around is awkward and clumsy too. All 3 times I've had this happen, I, along with E and J as well, have been completely sober. So, please help. Because honestly, I just want to know what the heck is happening. So I was maybe 9 or 10 years old in Mississippi visiting my grandma with my sister. It was the middle of the night and I'd been watching TV. Wanting a drink, I got out of my grand's living room to go to the kitchen. Now, my gran had a deck and a huge window that would show outside. My grandma, she lived right by the woods. Rarely saw anyone at night that weren't hunters looking for deer. I look out the big window, feeling sort of scared all of a sudden. And that's when I noticed outside there was a man in a black suit. But the weirdest thing was that he had no face. At least, that's what it looked like. Seeing a man with no face is horrifying, especially right next to the woods, and you know that no one else is awake at the time. I went to the kitchen to get my drink, then looked out the bay window in my grandma's dining room, which was attached to the kitchen. The faceless man was closer to the window now, and he just sort of stood there, unmoving, but seemingly staring right at me. My chest was pounding with fear. After all, the man was closer than before. Going back to the living room, knowing that I'd be safe due to the locked doors, but also still kind of freaking out, in the end I just sort of sat there and watched some TV. I finished drinking my drink and stand up, looking at the window in the living room, and the man was closer once again. Still staring me down, his hands by his sides. Feeling even more panicked, I go to throw away the can of soda that I had to drink in the kitchen. I look down to the bay window once more, and he hadn't moved closer this time. I walk back to the living room and turn the TV off, feeling eyes staring me down. My grandma was asleep, her husband was asleep with his sleep apnea machine going on in the background in their room. I left the living room to go to my room shared with my sister, and I never looked back. I walk into my room to find my sister passed out, soft snores leaving her lips, and eventually I lay down on the ground and I fell asleep. I found the courage to share this after, hearing numerous sightings of North American Indian mythical creatures, specifically the short people that seem to go by many names across the tribal regions of America. This exact type of creature has been sighted and discussed among Aboriginal people in Australia for thousands of years. In the southwest region, they're known as the Warraji, or hairy bushmen. Standing a few feet tall, they possessed insane strength and speed. Prior to colonization, there were stories of their friendship or alliance with Aboriginal people, but also there were stories of conflict and people or even children being taken by them. There were specific rules Aboriginal adults told their children, such as avoiding water bodies at night and in the evening, and no matter what, that never ever whistle in the dark. It invites them and it only spells trouble. Although, even some Aboriginal people say that these stories are just to warn kids about water safety. Well, in 1998, I knew none of this because, I'm not Aboriginal, and at the age of 10, when this all happened, I had never even met an Aboriginal person or been taught anything about Aboriginal culture in school. It was the 90s, and Australia had an uncomfortable relationship with the truth and colonization. Every school holidays, I used to leave the city and visit my aunt in the picturesque southwest countryside. I needed no encouragement in going because I love the outdoors, and had free rein to run amok on the dirt bike and go fishing alongside the magnificent Blackwood River whenever I felt like it, and so I went a lot. It was the 90s in Australia, and incredibly safe for a 10-year-old kid to roam the landscape for miles and hours on end, all alone with nothing but a trusty pocket knife. I was able to walk through my aunt's massive property to the edge of the forest, and then into the depths where the river flowed through, fishing for trout and redfin. On the last evening before I was due to go back home to the city, I was down there fishing alone as the sun was setting. I knew that I'd get into trouble being out that late, but having already snared a few trout, I figured that I'd be quickly forgiven. Plus, I was still getting bites, and I remember having caught the fish and kept them in an old metal bucket. I was on my last few pieces of bait anyway when I recall hearing a tiny sort of pinging noise on the side of the bucket. At first, I thought nothing of it because large gum nuts often fell from the trees. But then it happened again, much louder and more forceful this time. I remember checking the bucket and realized that they were small rocks and not gum nuts at all. I looked around assuming it was some kids from a neighboring property, which was very unlikely as it was maybe a 30-minute walk to the next property, at the other side of the river backed onto the national park where there were no other farms for miles too. Plus, I hadn't come across any kids throughout my entire stay at the farm either. But this is where it got pretty scary. The rocks, they got bigger and they started flying in from different directions, cutting my cheek and hitting me in the head. At this stage, I started crying. I was only 10 after all, and dropped the fishing rod. I had 3 large trout in the bucket, and my intention was to pick it up and run back to the farm as quick as I could. As I bent to pick it up, though, I was hit by another rock in the side of the head and fell over. I pulled myself up and I stared over to the other side of the river, the main source of the rocks. And what I saw paralyzed my whole body with fear. It was nearly dark at this stage, but I saw the outline of 3 short-looking bodies covered in hair. I would have put them at maybe a meter tall, 3 or 4 feet at most, the size of small children, but with the bodies of men. Their faces looked like they were sort of part ape, part human, but it was their eyes though. Even though it was getting dark, their eyes had this piercing yellow glow, but were completely black in the middle. They wore no clothes, but were covered in extremely thick, sort of clumpy hair all over their bodies, except from the knees down, and had arms that hung almost like cavemen. But here's the strangest thing. They stared at me almost without moving, like literal statues, with a curious expression fixed on their faces, and making absolutely no noise whatsoever. It made no sense, as only a few moments before rocks were pelting in from all directions, and yet now they appeared frozen, except for their eyes, which followed me. I managed to pull myself up and ran faster than all heck. My aunt was standing on the balcony and watched me tear through the long grass as quick as I could, with blood and cuts on my face. I told her everything, and she eventually called the police. One officer came by to get a statement, and he said that he'd visit some of the other farms around town, but he was certain that there weren't any other families in the area. My aunt just assumed that I couldn't see the figures properly due to the lack of light, and maybe even was suffering concussion from the rocks that hit my head. She assumed that they were kids or teens, but I know what I saw, and I'll never forget those murderous-looking yellow eyes, ever. The next morning, I went with my aunt to collect the fishing rod and bucket, and my aunt was shocked to see the fishing rod and the bucket were still there. She thought that it was an opportunistic crime, and we checked the bucket, and what we saw made our skin crawl. 3 perfect trout skeletons were now floating in the bucket, not one morsel left. We don't have bears or wolves in Australia, and even the odd dingo or fox wouldn't have devoured an entire fish and left its skeleton there like that, especially without the bucket being tipped over. The whole ordeal was genuinely terrifying, but as things tend to happen when you're a kid, you just sort of forget about it, or it lives somewhere in the back of your mind rent-free for a while. The police officer, they found nothing of note, and as nothing was stolen, there was no need for further inquiry. It was the talk of the country pub for a few weeks, though. My aunt was a local. The town had experienced odd things throughout the years, such as the sighting of tiger-like animals in the deep forest, and other strange noises and happenings reported by lumberjacks in the deep forest too. But it wasn't until I got into my 20s and became a social worker that I started working with Aboriginal communities in town. During celebratory events, I came to learn of the different Dreamtime creation stories, and eventually I had the confidence to tell an elder about what I went through when I was young. He immediately recognized it as the Wurundjis straight away and said that I was lucky to leave that forest alive. He seemed to think that they must have believed that I was an Aboriginal boy, and I do have a mixed racial background, and the protocol would have been for me to leave a couple of fish outside the bucket, skewered on sticks for them to come and collect after as payment for fishing in their river. But as I didn't, they reminded me, the first few pelts, and when I still didn't, they eventually attacked. There aren't any Aboriginal families in that part of the southwest, Caucasian only, to this day too, which may explain why it only happened to me. The elder believed that they could have taken me, though, for disobeying their sacred customs. That part always wakes me up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night, because genuinely, I believe they could have. It's not a story I tell my family and friends, but will confide in with the odd Aboriginal colleague or client at work, and they always tell me similar things. Don't even get me started on the Australian desert. But I'm 36 now, and as time has gone on, I find this event something that I think about more often. And that, despite becoming more logical and cynical in age. I often ponder its significance and proof of otherworldly beings living alongside of us on this planet. And whenever I think about it, I always shudder. This last year, my dad and I went deer hunting like we do every year. My brothers and uncles and grandpa all go, and we have deer stands spread out across maybe 60 acres deep in the Chippewa National Forest. But my dad's deer stand is one of the closer ones to our camp, so at lunchtime or nighttime, we wait for our family members to walk down the trail and wait for us to get out of our stand to walk back to the camp together. Our deer stand has a sort of locking latch on the outside and the inside, and it's a bit finicky and takes actual strength to get the latch to shut properly, and then you push it down a little to lock it in place too. But there is a latch on the outside and the inside, like I said, so if you unlock it to get in, you lock it from the inside so the door stays shut. Keep in mind it's not actually locked, but it's a latch where you sort of lift it up, push it through the hole, and push it back down to keep it in place. It is impossible, really, to lock yourself in the deer stand. Anyway, it's pretty much completely dark out, and we're waiting for our family to come back down the trail. We didn't see any headlamps yet, but we decided, okay, let's get out and meet them on the trail for when they come. I tried to open the door, but it was stuck shut. My dad's like, what the heck? Why or how would you lock us in like this? I said, Dad, there's no way for me to physically lock the outside after getting in. Not even reaching at the window could you get close to the door latch. We were completely dumbfounded and kind of freaked out. Eventually, my family came to the trail and were just sort of standing waiting for us to get out. My brother walked up to our stand and opened the latch for us, also confused how that could have possibly happened. Like I said, it takes some real strength to push that latch up and through the hole and latch back down like that. And there's just absolutely no possible way that we could have locked the outside from the inside. I still don't know how this happened, but it freaks me out to think that maybe somebody was out there trying to lock us in or something. I'm a little bit nervous to go hunting this year. I hate walking into the woods at 5 a.m. and back to camp at dark. I hope I don't experience anything like that again, because it definitely has me really unnerved. So I'm pretty sure that we were involved in some weird couples killing spree last night. Me and my boyfriend's family, we're big campers. We try to go as often as possible and try to find different places depending on the weather and the season. We booked a beautiful spot on the lake and had been anticipating this trip for months at this point. Imagine our shock when we got to our site and we discovered that the lake has flooded most of the campsite with the exception of ours, one next to it, and then one about 100 feet away. We didn't get to enjoy the lake because, well, there was no beach access and the water was not safe. We shrugged it off though, and we set up our campsite as usual. Now, at about 7 p.m, we see a car pull into the campsite right next to ours. No big deal, we just got about our night. I noticed though that they were not in a hurry to set up camp. A middle-aged man and a woman got out of the car. I'm a very observant and paranoid person, so I notice details that most people may not think anything of. In my mind though, these campers arrive really late after check-in and don't unload anything from the car. They didn't talk to each other and they kind of just looked into our site in passing. Again, no big deal I think, but a bad storm hit us a few hours later and we were literally holding down our tents while the couple next to us just sat in their car, no tent. I still thought that this was odd, but my boyfriend said they probably were car campers and had the back seat set up to sleep in. Okay, makes sense I guess, but still, why come to a tent campground? Anyway, we go to sleep and all is well, until I'm awakened by the sound of footprints in our vicinity. We had been drinking, so the fact that this noise woke me up means that it was very close to our tent. I spring up instantly and listen. I heard people walking up to our tent and saw the silhouette of a man through my tent too. In a state of panic, I unzip the tent and look outside. Two people with red headbang flashlights are standing about 7 feet from me. I rush myself back into the tent and grab my pepper spray air pistol. During all of this, my boyfriend wakes up asking me why I opened the tent like this, and I explain what I just saw. His reasoning is that it was the neighbors just gathering firewood and I can't shoot them about that. Immediately, though, the people walk away and we hear silence once again. I take a moment to think that maybe I'm being paranoid and am also just a little bit hungover. I try going back to bed but can barely sleep at this point. The next morning, though, we wake up and the couple next to us has what looked like a tarp tied from one tree to another. I'm thinking, what the heck is that? I notice that the man has the same khaki long pants he had on the night prior, and the woman also wearing the same clothes. This in itself isn't weird while camping, but what was weird is that they were not dressed for camping at all. It's hot, and the clothes that they were wearing were not what you would wear in this environment. Long pants, almost like to protect you when going through the woods to hijack another site is what I thought. We go about our day though, and I keep noticing that the couple doesn't seem to interact with each other at all. They don't talk and start a fire in the fire pit for lunch, taking it very easy. Me and my boyfriend's family, though, we decided that due to the weather in the lake, we would head home early. Well, the couple next to us, who had literally just started a fire, immediately packed up and left just as we started to pack. They left in a hurry, too. We eventually finished packing, though, and we get back to my boyfriend's parents' house and decide to stay for a while there. Well, I told my boyfriend's parents about the whole thing and how off and weird it was, and what they had to say honestly chilled me to the core. They said that the man upon arrival seemed to be antagonizing the dogs. They have a Rottweiler mix and a pit mix, to see how they would react. They weren't sure why he took this stance, but after me telling them this, we put our stories together. They pointed out that he would stand and stare at the dogs while the woman was acting busy doing absolutely nothing but just sort of moving around. Then they pointed out that the campers sat facing our campsite and not the lake. They also noticed that there was minimal interaction between them and just seemed to be staring at us the whole time. They said one of the dogs would growl occasionally throughout the night, and they didn't get much rest that night. When I brought up that my boyfriend said that they were probably just getting firewood, they both said, why would they go out of their way to collect firewood that has been heavily rained on? Also, why wait till we go to sleep and then pack up the next day and leave? So, this is what I think. I think these people were locals who knew the condition of the campsite and scoped it out. They noticed that our site was reserved and isolated. No one else was there but us and them and some other campers pretty far apart. I think that they camped out to either rob us or maybe even murder us, but then heard my boyfriend say something about not shooting them, not knowing that it was a pepper spray air gun, and they backed off. Then they spent the afternoon observing us until they saw us leaving and they decided to call it off. Because, honestly, none of their behavior makes much sense. So, my question for all of you guys is, am I crazy? Early on in my relationship, I'm 24 and female, I frequently spent the night at my boyfriend's, 23 and male, his condo. He lived alone on the bottom floor. His neighbor above him was kind and usually a quiet guy. I rarely noticed noises coming from above. For context, almost the entire condo was hardwood flooring, with the only carpet being in the family room. My boyfriend was working a pipe fitting job and commuting a couple of hours away, so he would usually leave at about 4 in the morning, if not earlier. I would usually stay in bed for a couple of hours after he left, then would hit the road around 7 or 8, depending on my work schedule. The first time that I noticed something, it was just a bit of a dream, albeit a very vivid dream. This took place after my boyfriend left for work and I had fallen back asleep. In the dream, I was walking through his condo and, as I passed by the bathroom, an old man came out and started yelling at me, saying something was wrong with the water. He had no clothes on, was shorter, rounder, bald sort of fella.
when I went to look in the tub, the water was coming out of it dark brown, almost black in color, and the old man started telling me that I needed to get out, still yelling at me. I didn't think much of this dream. I figured that it was my mind being silly and remembering that the building used to be an assisted living facility. A week or two later, though, is when the weirdness escalated a bit. My boyfriend left for work as usual, but this time I had a harder time sort of falling back asleep. I gave up after about half an hour or so, settling on scrolling through social media, until it was time to leave. As I'm laying in his bed, I hear what sounds like wet footsteps coming down the hallway. I can hear each individual step squish as it comes down the about 20-foot long hallway, until it stops outside of the bedroom door. There was no shadow that I could see, and the sound was so clear that I initially assumed my boyfriend had forgotten something at home, or that he had been sent home from work. I waited and waited for him to open the door, but I never heard the footsteps recede, and nobody came in. I stayed frozen in bed, and ultimately chose to ignore it. I waited patiently for the sun to come out, and promptly left without even making the bed. I'm certainly no stranger to the supernatural and paranormal. It's not uncommon for people in my family to experience these things, but it has been a really long time since I've experienced this particular reoccurrence, and life has gotten a bit better since it stopped years ago. Now, for the longest time since about the age of maybe 6 years old, I've experienced sleep paralysis. Before it started happening, I experienced a really terrible dream of a tall humanoid-shaped monster that was fully black. Not a shadow figure, not a person shrouded in darkness. This thing was made of, like, void. Basically, in the dream, I heard a loud roar from outside my 2-story bedroom window. I looked outside and saw this thing standing underneath a corner street lamp. No visible features, beside it being tall, like maybe 8 foot, humanoid in frame, and the roaring noise was coming straight from it. I would then run downstairs and my family would surround me like they were trying to guard me from this thing, but each time I turned around, a family member would vanish, and then once they were all gone, everything would go back as the roaring got louder, and then I would wake up. I would only ever experience this dream once, but it got followed first by brief bouts of what I feel is maybe like astral projection or an out-of-body experience, which only occurred in my grandma's house for some reason. I would wake up and see myself in bed, and then feel this sort of pulling sensation that would lead me to the front door, and I would stare at them and feel this sensation that something was on the other side of that door and wanted me to come outside. Nothing ever spoke. There was no noise, but I felt this draining and foreboding sensation when I stood looking at that door, and I would wake up extra tired the following day. This was a reoccurring experience, only ever at my grandmother's house, which I fully believe was haunted, and I can explain that later. The sleep paralysis was far more random though, like once a year I would guess. At first I wouldn't see anything. I would just experience the horrible panic of being unable to move, my heart racing, my chest feeling heavy and feeling really hot and uncomfortable. Then eventually I'd see that void creature in the dream that I had when I was 6. It never did anything. It was silent this time, but there was a fuzzy crackling noise coming from it, like static, and again it looked as if my hand would disappear if I were to try and reach out to touch it. Each time I would have sleep paralysis, it would be closer to me as well, like it was just inching closer each time that I had an episode. The last and final straw that I saw it was when I was 21, and it had actually been a couple of years since I experienced anything. So I brushed it off for the longest time, but one night I woke up feeling extremely hot, and the void figure was just standing directly next to my bed, looking down at me with bright, burning red eyes. The room itself was also a hazy, deep red, as if it was in a photography darkroom or something. The static noise was pretty loud, and it sounded like this thing was speaking, but I couldn't make out any actual words. Its voice was deep and kind of had a vibration to it. Oddly enough, I didn't feel fear as I stared up at it. I just stared at it for what felt like maybe a minute, and then I closed my eyes and went back to sleep, almost as if I just couldn't be bothered with it. I didn't even remember it as well until midday the following day, and that was when I actually was scared. But weirdly, nothing further ever happened after that. At least for a while it didn't. No sleep paralysis, no void figure in dreams, nothing. It just stopped. It wasn't until I was about 30-something as well that something happened that shaked me up pretty badly. Now, I was married at the time and my husband worked overnight, so I'd be at home by myself and sleeping. I need some kind of white noise in order to sleep, and that usually comes in the form of a fan being on. I woke up because the fan turned off. It isn't actually uncommon for the power to go out randomly in our area for an hour or so in the middle of the night, so I merely sat up in bed for a moment out of confusion. For a split second, though, I thought that I heard what sounded like a quiet growl under my bed. I didn't have any pets at the time. I brushed it off because it was so quiet, and I figured that I must still be out of it from sleep or whatever. But I got up with the intention to go to the kitchen to see if the oven light was blinking, because that usually indicated that the power simply just went out and was now back on. But the second that I opened the bedroom door, there was that deafening roar from the nightmare when I was 6, and everything in the house suddenly turned red. My only thought was to run out the front door, but when I did, I ran right out of my bedroom again like I was caught in some sort of a loop. I couldn't leave the house. The roar was suddenly getting louder, and I was really starting to panic. I began screaming, and I kept repeating, "Wake up and let me out," when I finally stopped by the front door and just held the doorknob. I could feel sharp claws dragging down the back of my neck when suddenly I woke up. I was drenched in a cold sweat, and I was stuck in bed for a while because I was just afraid to move. But eventually I found the courage to get up and turn on every light in the house, and that definitely was the most vivid nightmare that I had ever had. I'm almost 34 now. I got out of a toxic, unfaithful marriage and currently am doing a lot better on my own. There were a lot of negative people in my life before and have since cut them out of my life. And who knows, maybe that plays a part in all of this, because I haven't had anything like that really happen since then. Then again, I've had years of dry spells before, and I don't get nightmares quite like that anymore. None involving the void being, at least. Who knows, maybe my cats play a role since they sleep right next to me every night, and in a way I feel like they ward off bad things. I fully believe that I had been haunted by something that preyed on me when I was most vulnerable in my life. I just really hope that I never experience it again. In Northern California, my family lived in an old house from the 60s. It was worn and squeaky, but livable. A charming house, really. We lived in this house for a few years, and my experience in this house was when I was also young, maybe about 13 or 14. And many of these instances had convinced me thoroughly that this place was haunted. So when we first moved in, there were many drafts, cold spots, and some strange sounds through the house, but nothing came close to the pictures that I'd gotten of the entity in the home. Leading up to the photos being taken, my family had started seeing orbs, shadow figures, etc. that were generally non-applicable to a haunting in their eyes, but I was freaked out more and more as time went on. And one day, I was sitting on my parents' bed reading an old magazine when I heard a very clear "hi" right next to my ear. I left the room so fast it was unreal. Another day, I'd lost my phone for a week, tore apart my room from top to bottom, couldn't find it anywhere. A week passed and I found it sitting neatly on a box in my closet. Okay, I must have looked past it, right? Whatever. Around this time, I was known for making little recordings of my child self singing and making atrocious noises because I was a weird kid. The thing is that I always named those recordings, always. The day that I found the phone, I went in there to listen to my sound clips, and there were 3 new unnamed recordings. Weird. I mean, I would have named those for sure. So I played them and was instantly freaked out. One was less than a second long. The problem with the logic behind myself making this one was that I debunked myself from pocket recording because to hit start and stop, the phone was too slow that it takes about 3 whole seconds from start to end the recording. The first one was short and wasn't dissimilar to the sound of a horse galloping. The second sounded like a pocket recording, so I shrugged that one off. Okay, strange. The third recording was fairly long and hosted a loud crunching or marching noise with children in the background like a party. I hadn't been to any parties, nor was I in school for the spring break, but you can clearly hear an adult male voice say the word name Fallon, but the rest is muffled. Okay, cool, whatever. I forget about it. But a week or 2 later, my phone disappeared once again. I searched and searched my closet for days to no avail, only to find it a week later in the exact spot that it was last time. This time, I instantly directed it to the sound clips and, to my surprise, found 3 more recordings. 2 short ones and 1 long one. The first 2 were just static noise, but the third one brings chills to my arms every time that I listen or think about it. It was a very little girl singing into the phone like I would have, but I definitely did not sing that. It was hard to make out, but it was something about going to the edge, then something else I couldn't quite make out, and then it just ends. Don't get me wrong, I know it's heaps unlikely that there's a ghost who can record themselves singing into a phone, but I have no idea where these came from. I'm the youngest in my family, and nobody could tell me where those came from either. Nobody would play a prank like that, and my young cousin, pictured in the picture that you're about to see, didn't have any knowledge of how to navigate a phone yet. Sometime later, I was woken up really late at night one time for some reason. I've had terrible insomnia problems my whole life, but I could hear my dad in the kitchen. He must be coming home from work, I thought, checking the alarm clock. But it was 3 in the morning, and there was no way that he was home that late. Then I remembered, no, he didn't work today. Heavy bootsteps started walking from the kitchen towards the hallway. It walked from the laminated floor into the kitchen to the carpet, just down the hall, and eventually stopped in front of my sister's room. And I was awake for a few hours afterwards, not hearing anything else for the rest of the night, scared out of my mind, for sure. So, now to the pictures. I was babysitting my younger cousin by myself one day for a few hours. We were coloring and playing with Play-Doh. Pictured is me in front of them taking a picture of them, and I didn't see it when I took the pictures, and I didn't know it was there until years after we moved out. But the timestamp stated that they were taken within the same minute. And behind my cousin sat with the china cabinet with a mirror in the back. The figure in the mirror would have been standing just behind me in the kitchen. You can sort of see the cabinet of the kitchen, right, and the fridge to the left, and the window just past it if you look carefully. The figure, it had no facial features. The first picture was taken with the figure, and the second is without it. And you cannot tell me that this place wasn't freaky. Anyways, that concludes my story, and I would be happy to answer any questions if you guys have any. Thanks for listening. My childhood home, I lived there from maybe ages 4 to 14, always had a somewhat thick negative energy to it. I remember my parents having family and family friends over as a child, and a few of them making verbal comments about how the energy felt dark, observant, and that they'd get the creeps if they stayed the night for any sort of reason. In my experience, as I aged through the elementary school period, the parts of the house that felt the darkest and most ominous were basically the whole upstairs, the game room, my bedroom, and the bathroom, and downstairs, and it was the laundry room that felt particularly dark. In general, the other parts of the house felt okay enough, but as a child I experienced significant fear around sleeping in my bedroom alone or at all, even if my mum accompanied me to my bed. Even during the day, if I was playing with my toys, I'd eventually get the creeps, and it felt like something was just lurking, observing me, slowly making its way, most of the time after some time playing in there. That creeping feeling that would make the hair on my arms stand up, and I'd look around my room. My eyes would always lock onto my closet door and stare at it in fear. Eventually, I'd find the courage to rip my attention away from it and flee out of my room. Now, on one particular day, I was playing with my toys on the floor of my bedroom before dinner. I was excited about the toys that I was playing with because I had just gotten them for my birthday. No one else was upstairs but me, and I get called downstairs for dinner. I go down and I eat, and after dinner I come back up pretty quickly as I was excited to resume playing with my new toys. I walk into my room and I freeze, as my toys were in completely different positions and locations than where I'd left them. Action figures that I previously had sitting were now stood up straight and feet away from where it was sitting before. Toys that were on a piece of toy furniture were now taken off of the furniture, etc. In fact, almost every toy was moved. I was about 6 or 7 at that time, and I really could not understand it. In my rational brain, I asked my sister, who is 2.5 years older than me, if she went into my room, and she said no. And I just couldn't wrap my head around it. For years, every night, I would sleep in my parents' bed. That was the usual, really. I adamantly would not sleep in my bedroom. It was more than a childlike defiance as well. I was petrified to sleep in there. So much so that I had an unfortunate bedwetting issue well into 2nd or 3rd grade. And one night, my mum was able to get me to lay there at night alone. I had full body shakes from fear, and I remember so vividly not being able to sleep at all, and getting so scared that I hid myself under my blankets, where I hid awake for what felt like at least 2 hours or so. I remember how badly I was sweating, getting so hot from being tucked under my blanket. My shirt and pants were wet with sweat, and under the blanket, I felt like there was something looming over top of me outside, like the vastness of the dark in my room housed an energy that I could not look in the face, like the dark corners were swirling with an energy waiting for me to come out from the covers. Eventually, it was so hot under there that I just had to come out, otherwise I would have started to have trouble breathing, more than I already was. So I whipped the covers off of me, felt the colder flow of the air grace my skin, and immediately darted my eyes all over my room to analyze. I started sobbing, bawling in fear. I feared my closet, that was cracked with light on as a nightlight. I felt exposed and vulnerable to the veil which was thin in my bedroom. I remember getting up quick, running out of my room, closing the door as an energy shut off, and sitting in the hallway hugging myself, just crying. Now, as I got older, I was able to handle sleeping in my room a little better. It was in the 4th grade, about 9 years old, when I was able to kind of sleep in there. And on one of the first nights that I slept in there alone in the 4th grade, I fell asleep in my bed, but woke up on one of our living room couches, which faced the laundry room. When I awoke, it was about 4 in the morning. It was dark in the living room, only some moonlight coming in from our tall windows, which faced our dark backyard. I was laying on my side. My field of vision in front of me included the living room, which flowed into the dining room, and the laundry room as well. Initially, I was incredibly confused why I was on the couch. I didn't feel tired about waking, but I just felt awake, and as my eyes adjusted on the darkness of the laundry room, I realized that I was being watched. I will never forget the face of the entity standing there looking at me with an unwavering, sinister gaze. Again, in my rational brain, I tried to imagine what could have been in the laundry room that could have just looked like some seemingly demonic entity. I couldn't think of anything that was in there that could have caused that illusion. In there was just the washer and the dryer and the cabinets on the wall, really. Nothing else. No clothes or towels, no posters or artwork. Nothing. But I stared into the darkness of the laundry room that, as my eyes further adjusted, seemed to illuminate this creature. More pale white skin, big circular black darkness around the eyes which peered upwards at me from a downward pointed chin, hair that was long, black and stringy. Its pale white fabric skin seemed to disappear vertically into the darkness, and I instantly felt frozen in fear. It wasn't moving, not even an inch. It didn't move a single muscle. I must have been breathing half of what you normally breathe in a minute, as I didn't move, or more that I didn't even need to move. I was hardly blinking, and I definitely wasn't going to go back to sleep. For some, I know that this sounds a lot like sleep paralysis, but I know for a fact that this was not that, because I was 100% not moving on purpose. I was not trying to move, and I couldn't. I was deathly afraid, and would not allow myself to bring any attention my way from this thing. I stared at it until the sun came up, and my parents' alarms started going off to get us ready for school. When the sun rose, I remember how stiffly I moved when I stood up. I kept my body back pressed on the wall next to the couch as I made the corner into my parents' room, never turning my back towards the laundry room in this face. Minutes later, when my parents were up and I needed to get ready for school, I ascended the stairs to my room and I found my bedroom blanket strewn down the stairs vertically, which would symbolize it falling off of my body as I maybe sleepwalked out of bed and down the stairs earlier, leading me to waking up on the couch. I don't remember what ensued following that, though. All I know is that around the same time frame, I had another sleepwalking episode where I wound up on the couch after falling asleep on my bed. This time, when I woke up on the couch, I also had articles of clothing taken off of me that would put places that would not have fallen onto naturally. The places that I found them almost appeared purposeful. Before or after these two sleepwalking events, though, I have never sleptwalked otherwise. I started experiencing other things too. In my room during the day and at night, toys in my closet would start making a sound out of nowhere. I wasn't as scared as I used to be when I was younger, so I was able to handle these happenings and feelings of fear better. They never diminished the dark feeling in the corners, though. But one night, I generally was having a hard time falling asleep, so I laid awake in the quiet of the night, everybody else asleep. I was staring at the little sliver of hallway ceiling that I was able to see from inside of my room, which was slightly illuminated due to a nightlight or something from far away in the bathroom. For hours, the silhouette of a man's side profile was on that ceiling. To compare how it looked, unironically, it looked how people online describe the Hat Man. It looked like it had a top hat on, a big brow bone, big nose, and a strong chin. At some point, though, it must have disappeared because I looked back at some stage and it was gone. I could continue on about the energy in my house and all of the little things that happened. My main experience was what happened in that laundry room, though. I have always hesitated to tell people about it too because of the Hollywood-esque nature about the way the entity looked. I get that. I've only ever told a few people, in fact, and even then I feel like they think I'm conjuring up something that I'd seen in Hollywood. As an adult, I've spoken to the same family friends who used to visit when I was a kid about the energy in that house. Now, one family friend who is particularly sensitive to energy and was spiritual for the time said that one night she stayed the night with her husband. Side note too, it was often my parents' family friends who would stay the night upstairs. My parents were not shy partiers or anything, so often our family friends were too drunk to drive home and they'd stay the night. And if needed, my parents would offer my bed. These family friends have always been safe and trusted adults in my life. Shared with strangers here, I know that this could sound a bit strange that my parents just let their drunk friends have my bed. However, this particular family friend was like an aunt to me, and I don't recall being at home this night when she slept in my bed. Anyway, she told me at some stage in my adult life that this night she slept in my bed, which she never had before. She said that she woke up many times in the night to feeling my bed shaking erratically. Not super strong shaking, but enough of an erratic movement that the entire bed frame woke her up many times in the night. Now, as an adult, I don't think too much about all of what I'd experienced. I remember in middle school when I first watched the first Insidious movie, connecting really deeply to that movie. I resonated a lot with Dalton, as he seemed to be the target of what was going on and having these confusing things happen to him. I definitely feel that I experienced more in that house than my sister or my parents ever did. I felt exposed constantly in that house to, well, whatever it was that was there. I live in South Africa and am now 22 years old, but when this took place, I was about maybe 8 to 9, I think. My family and I had gone camping in a popular dam for what was meant to be 2 nights. It was my mother, my older sister, and myself pitched up in a tent. On the first night, sometime pretty late, I had gone out to go for a pee, but on the way back, 2 older men, maybe in their 40s or so, they were sat at a fire and they called me over. I'll admit that I was a pretty brain-dead child at that time who didn't heed the wisdom of stranger danger, and so I obliged. They were busy braaiing and offered me some meat, which I happily accepted. We started chatting about stuff, and in hindsight it was mostly them just giving the usual small talk conversation points, but after a few minutes I remember I started to feel extremely dizzy. It was like the world was spinning, but everything was going in slow motion, if that makes any sense. Now, using drugs quite regularly, I definitely think that I was high under some sort of influence of some sorts. My memory becomes a little fuzzy at that point, but I remember them offering me to take me for a ride in their car to show me something at that point. A little late, I know, but I realized something was up and I started to cry, and I tried making my way back to my tent, but these guys just kept insisting. I must have made a decent amount of noise though, as another camper came up and began asking them what was going on. They told her something about trying to help me back to my family or what have you. My memory is really fuzzy here as well, but she ended up bringing me back to my mum, and they were talking about something outside the tent while I went back to bed. The next day, all I remember was it was a nightmare of nausea, and I pretty much ended our camping early as we went back home after this. As for the 2 men, I never did see them that day, but it's not like I was looking either, so I don't know if they left or not, but truly I was just glad to be going home. When I graduated college, I was about 24 years old. I really wanted to get out on my own and try living alone at that age. I mean, bit of a late bloomer, I know, but luckily for me, my grandma had asked me to move in to an assisted living center about a year prior. I had asked my parents if I could live there. They talked it over with my grandma, and she agreed that it would be nice to have someone there after a year of it sitting empty. This was in a kind of up-and-coming area, but Still, it had its rough spots for sure. Regardless, I was really excited until, well, I got there to do a walkthrough to see how I was going to set up my things. The house was a shotgun-style sort of home with a cellar that could only be accessed from the outside. While I was walking through the house, I swore that I was hearing noises, though. Finally, I realized that they were coming from the basement, so I called the police and they came out and escorted out 6 people from the cellar. They were apparently squatters that had been living there, and after they left, I went down there to find, well, all kinds of stuff. The cops took all the drugs and anything else illegal, but it looked like someone had spray painted the walls just all over the place. It was just a concrete cellar where the water heater and the HVAC were, so I wouldn't have really cared, except it seemed to be kind of, well, satanic, I guess is the best word. I don't know anything about that stuff, but there was a couple of pentagrams and a chalk circle on the floor. The cops didn't really have anything to say about it. They didn't know either. So I poured some water on the floor to wash away the circle, but the walls I just left as they were. Well, fast forward a few months of me living there. Honestly, I had forgotten all about it. I had started dating my future wife, and she was over a lot. We were getting ready for bed one night in the bathroom brushing our teeth, when a knock came from the back door. I ignored it, but it came again. It was 1 a.m, mind you, and this was my back door as well. I mean, someone had to have come into my backyard by opening the fence gate. So I grabbed my gun and went to the door, keeping it out of view, and some guy was standing there on the porch. I opened the interior wooden door, but kept the outside storm door shut and locked. I asked what he was here for since it was so late, and all he said was, "Is Christina here?" I told him that he had the wrong house, and all he said was, "Oh, so you don't want me to leave?" I told him that he better leave and not come back, and he just sort of stood there, staring at me. I'll admit that I was getting very nervous at this point, and so I shut the door. He walked down the steps and just stood in my backyard, staring at the house. And then he tried to open the cellar doors. I had them padlocked and he gave up eventually, but I opened the back window and told him to get out of here before the cops show up, or he gets shot, or maybe both. But again, he just stared, and then finally he left. I didn't sleep that night. Again, though, a couple of months later, my girlfriend told me that the guy came back, just standing in my backyard staring at the house. This time it was in broad daylight, and I called the cops this time, and he tried the cellar doors again, but left before they showed up. The next day I went down to the cellar to see if maybe there had been something left behind that he was trying to get to, but I genuinely found nothing. It was just a damp, disgusting cellar with a dirt floor, and I have zero idea why he wanted to be in there. I highly doubt the satanic stuff had anything to do with it, but it certainly just made it a whole lot creepier, I guess. I unfortunately had to move out sometime later as I could no longer afford it. We never saw the guy again, but the whole situation was just really, really weird. So about a year ago, I smelled cigarettes in my home. I don't smoke though, never have. The windows were all closed. I walked downstairs and it was the strongest in the living room. I should mention too that it was around 2 a.m. since I'm a bit of a night owl. I didn't think much about it because it could have been my neighbors at the time. I didn't turn on any lights. I walked into the kitchen and grabbed some cereal. I sat down at the dining room table and I ate my cereal in the dining room. As I scrolled through my phone, I heard a noise in the living room, like somebody moved something heavy across the coffee table. I'm still surprised I didn't wet myself from fear, but I looked up and I saw this silhouette of a tall and bulky man sitting on the couch. I immediately made out the camouflage uniform in the dark, and he looked at me. I looked at him, and we literally just stayed like that for a while. I eventually got up and flipped on the dining room light, which shined into the living room, and he immediately disappeared. I went upstairs feeling like I had actually gone crazy at that moment. Over the course of the next week, same thing. With the strong smell of cigarettes, I'd walk down the stairs and he'd be just there, chilling on the couch in the complete dark. As the next month went on as well, things kept getting weird. Things started moving a literal tiny inch from where they should have been, but only ever in the living room. I never had any experiences with him during broad daylight until I was in my kitchen doing dishes that afternoon. I had headphones on like usual as I did the dishes, and I suddenly felt someone press right up against my back. And I don't mean like somebody grazed me by accident, I mean that they literally stood right up against my back. Being a female who lives with no men, I literally whipped around so fast that I almost broke my own neck. But there was nothing. The kitchen was empty. Small things like that kept happening at random times. When I was sitting watching some YouTube videos, when I was doing my makeup, even when I was lying in bed. It was nothing severe, just small things, like my hair was moved, feeling like somebody pat my shoulder or the top of my head or something. The only thing that I could really come up with is that it was him. He had never caused problems exactly. I feel like he could be causing actual chaos and purposely scaring me, but he seems very laid back and almost sweet, I guess. So I bought him an ashtray. Obviously, he can't use it, probably. I don't know how ghosts work, but I bought a vintage one and I put it on the coffee table in front of the couch. And every time that I would pass that table, it's always moved around. If I'm in a different room downstairs, I even hear it slide around the coffee table sometimes. I guess he seems to like it. That's been my normal for the last several months, in fact. I guess I'm here though because, well, you see, the last 2 weeks I've really been struggling with depression, and I've noticed when I'm upset I always get slammed with that smell of cologne. That same cologne every time as well. I brushed it off the first time, but it just keeps happening, and I'm pretty convinced that it's him being nearby. I've never smelled a cologne like it, and I don't own any cologne at all myself, but anyways, I guess I'm sharing this not to ask for explanations, but just to have this somewhere to say it. Because I'm scared if I told somebody else in my real life that they'd probably think that I'm going crazy. This happened when I was about 12 or 13. For important context, I lived in an apartment complex that was 2 sets of rows, each row with 4 apartments. I lived in the apartment closest to the street of one row, and had 2 cousins that lived in the apartment at the very end of the row, in the back. I would hang out with them just about daily. We were very into soccer at the time, and we would walk to the park about 4 or 5 streets away, along with some of the neighborhood kids, and play some soccer there. Now, I say neighborhood kids, but it was a big group of about maybe 15 kids total, and the ages ranged from 10 years old all the way up to 17. One of my 2 cousins was the 17-year-old, which is why my parents allowed me to go without any supervision in the first place. So on this day, like usual, we made our way back to the park. Some of us would walk, some would ride scooters or skateboards. I had my bike that day. But we get to the park and we start playing. About halfway through our game, my parents drive by and they call to me from our car. They tell me that they'd be going to the store and to wait at the park for them. Okay, no big deal. I figured that they must want to go somewhere else afterwards, and it's just easier to pick me up from the park than for me to wait back at the house. Of course, this doesn't make sense because it's a 4-street distance, but at the time, to my 12-year-old mind, it was perfectly logical. So we keep playing for about another hour, and then as we get closer to sunset, more and more kids start making their way back to their house. When my cousins wanted to leave, they asked me if I was ready, and I said that my parents told me to wait for them here. So they left and I stayed behind. Eventually, too, it was just me. Honestly, though, that was not really a big deal for me. I'm familiar with the neighborhood, and I have my bike, and the energy of a 12-year-old. So I start riding my bike up and down the street, just sort of killing time. At this point, it hasn't occurred to me that if my parents wanted me to wait for them at the park, they wouldn't want me to wait past sunset. But eventually I get impatient and hungry, but not wanting to get grounded for disobeying my parents, I kept waiting. Except instead of waiting at the park, I crossed the street and was waiting there instead. After a few minutes, a car drove up and stopped next to me. Nothing scary yet because there is a stop sign there, so I don't really pay it much mind. Except when it drove away, I realized that the car looked a bit weird. It was old and boxy, like an 80s car, but what really stood out was that it looked spray-painted grey. What I mean is that it was definitely not real car paint, or done by a professional at least. I don't know if someone who stole a car would be dumb enough to draw that much attention to it, or if the look was intentional, but you could tell that it was just spray-painted all over it. Anyway, it drove away and I kept waiting, annoyed now. Then the car comes back from the other side of the street. I noticed it because it was hard to ignore it at that point, but my survival instincts are still not kicking in. Maybe they were lost or just wanted to turn around without doing a U-turn. And since the park is a big square, going around it and coming back is easy enough to do. A few minutes go by, they drive up again and stop at the stop sign again. This time I'm starting to get a bit nervous, so I look at the car. 2 men are inside, very scruffy looking, unkempt beards, unkempt hair, dirty faces, stains on their shirts. They look at me. They both smile at the same time. They look at each other, smile even bigger in the creepiest smile that I've ever seen someone do to this day. And then they drove away. Their smile creeped me out so much that I was now on high alert. In particular, I was watching the other side of the park, where they would come from if they went around again like they did the first time. And sure enough, they did. This also means that they were now on the same side of the street as me. So as soon as I saw that car, I jumped on my bike and I rode as fast as I humanly could. I could hear one yelling something, but I honestly don't know what it was. I was too busy riding for my life, and I could hear the car catching up, but I was too scared to even turn around. I somehow made it to my street and ran into the building, but I didn't want them seeing where I lived since my apartment would have been, well, the one visible from the street for the most part. So I went to the back instead, behind my cousin's apartment, and I hid there. My reasoning was, if they followed me inside the building, they would see me knocking on their door and get me before anyone answered. Worth noting, too, that if it wasn't obvious, this was definitely before cell phones. I waited for what felt like a few hours to my 12-year-old brain, but was probably only 20 minutes or so in hindsight, before I got enough courage to make the short walk down the row of apartments to mine, and I tried the door. It was unlocked, so I went inside and my parents were there, sitting on the couch watching TV. They asked me how our game was, completely nonchalantly, and I instantly questioned them and asked them why they didn't pick me up. They both looked confused. They asked me why they would tell me to wait there instead of home when it's a 4-street distance and I had my bike. Once they said that, it did make a whole lot more sense, but to this day I swear that they told me to wait for them there. They even told me that they were going to leave the door unlocked for me in case I got home before they did. In my excitement of the game, I must have just completely misheard them or something. I simply went to my room after that never telling them about any of it, because as a dumb kid I knew that if I said something that they wouldn't let me play soccer anymore, and that was clearly more important than my physical well-being at that stage. I never did see those guys or that car ever again. I look back on it now, and it doesn't matter how fast I was pedaling my bike. I mean, they were in a car. They should have and could have caught up if they wanted to, so I really don't know what their intentions were, if they were just having a laugh at my expense, if they were trying to scare me, or if they actually had something darker in mind. But I do think back on that day now and then, and get chills every time that I realize just how much different my life would be right now if they had actually caught up to me. So I'm 24 and male, and branching out a little bit in my dating practices. I've got a transgender date under my belt, and honestly it went really well. My second, however, made my intuition scream, "Get out of there." I was out Ubering food late one night, and when I was done I decided to try and hook up while I was in the city, away from my rural home. My attempts on Grindr for a meet were unsuccessful. I wasn't quite ready to give up yet, so I went to Tammy and started swiping. The first swipe of the day was a lucky one as well, or so I thought. At 4 a.m. I get a few messages that go like this: "Come chill, I'm bored, we can go with the flow and get to know each other. Number and home address, McKees Rock, Pittsburgh, PA. I was unnervingly forward, but I thought that I'd take a chance and texted the number. "Hey, are you still up?" I said. "Yeah, come and talk and chill," she said. "Have you had coffee, breakfast yet?" "No," she said. "Okay, would you like to get some?" She said, "I don't know, maybe." "It's gonna be a 30-minute drive, would you like to talk over the phone instead?" She says that she's going to take a shower and after that she will. I get within 10 minutes of the address and I get a text. She says, "I need 15 more minutes, why don't you bring something with you?" That's obviously fine so far, but I didn't get to talk to them and get a sense of who they were, so I take my knife and carry it, appendix style. I circle around the block to scope and find a parking spot, preferably close in case I need to nope the heck out of there. Someone had just parked out on the street in front of the location, and they were just sitting in their car, it seemed. I waited out a bit, and they just never come out. I then gained the courage to go to the door, mentally prepared for anything to go down. I knock and the door opens. I didn't recognize the person who opened the door, but I told them who I was here to see and they let me in, directing me to the door to my left. The guy then stands between me and the exit and says, "Come on, man, what the heck?" And as if on cue, another man enters the building and they go upstairs. I thought that this was the man who was parked in the spot and never got out as well. There were 3 apartments in said building, hers, the third, to the left as soon as you enter the main door, and then one up some stairs facing the main door. I didn't pay much mind at this point to where the last one was, but I knocked on the 3rd apartment to see my date, and she answers right away. "I still need a few more minutes," she says, and shuts the door. I didn't get much more than a glimpse of her face in the process, but once she shut the door, I was in the hall alone. It was then that I heard 2 to 3 men's voices speaking to each other, almost inaudibly as music dampened this secret conversation. In that moment, my heart suddenly sank to my stomach, and it felt like I had to go before anyone noticed that I'd left. So I walked out and went straight to my car. I drove forward as I watched the man in the street, presumably from that house, walk in my direction to see where I was going. I did a U-turn as there was a no outlet sign, only to find my original path blocked with an idle car. So I quickly took a side street out of there. I pass a few lights and then see the man that never left his car next to me at a red light, looking over at me. I managed to lose him going through some big trucks at the wee hours of the morning as I drove to more familiar territory. And once I was in the clear, I suddenly realized that there was something very off about whatever the heck that was. I don't know what could have happened to me that night, but looking back on it all, I'm really glad that my instincts kicked in while I still had a chance. This experience gave my whole family chills, and quite honestly, we're looking for a rational explanation for it. It happened on last Christmas. My grandparents' house is in the middle of the woods. Our whole family has this yearly get-together kind of thing during Christmas, and we were preparing dinner and my aunt was taking a nap at that time when she started screaming, twitching, and woke up in a cold sweat. She started mumbling nonsense about seeing visions of mangled toddlers creepily smiling and walking towards her. We thought that she went crazy until it was about bedtime. My grandfather crawled into his bed to go to sleep when he started suddenly hearing a toddler's voice saying "Mama" over and over again. According to him, the voice started to progress and got louder. There were no kids in our house, mind you. My grandfather's house is also in the middle of nowhere between the woods, which means that we don't have any neighbors close by either. My cousin, who was scrolling his phone while sitting on the toilet, started to hear the same sound around the same time that my grandfather heard it. The toilet is at the far right of the house, grandfather's room is at the far left, so really there's just no way that both of them could have been hearing the voice from different directions at the same time. My mother and myself were sharing a bed that day, and she woke up to the voice of a toddler giggling and saying "Mama." Our dog, an 8-month-old lab, was barking and growling crazily that night. It just was really unlike him. That furry dude is friendly with anyone and everything, but the same thing happened to my uncle, father, dad, and grandfather, and all of them woke up to the sounds of a supposedly cursed toddler. The weirdest part being them hearing the sound from different parts of the woods, though. Now, I'm a terrific sleeper, and I was oblivious to the situation until my cousin yeeted me out of my sleep. We all grabbed a bunch of flashlights and searched all around the area, but we didn't find anything. It resulted in a midnight family meeting with my grandmother claiming that it was her deceased son who died as a toddler coming to see her. My uncle claiming that it was the work of a thief. My aunt, too, saying that it was her deceased baby brother showing his rage as we forgot to light a candle on his grave last year. My grandfather saying that it must have been a wild animal, and so on and so forth. We almost forgot about this experience, too, until recently when we visited the house and were awoken by footsteps and some kind of soft murmurs. My aunt and uncle were saying that they kept on hearing something rolling on the roof of the days prior to this experience. I don't believe in your typical ghost, aka the vengeful, white-robed woman with pale skin and black hair looking for revenge or anything. I really hope to just get a rational explanation for this experience, and that's why I'm here. Has anyone had a similar experience before? I would also love for you to share your opinions about what this could have been. And although I do not strongly believe in ghosts as of now, I am willing to learn about their possible existence, and I'm trying to keep an open mind. Also, I don't think that there are any supposedly cursed objects in the house, so I would pretty much rule that out as a possibility. So, if you have any thoughts or any information for me, then please do share. So first of all, I'm not from North America, middle of Europe here actually, so there are no crazy big wild animals and mountain lions who could make weird sounds, or even hillbillies with guns in this story that I experienced during a time at college, but it was definitely still pretty spooky. So when I was in college, I lived directly on campus in one of the dorm buildings, and the campus of my small college was not located in the local city, but a bit sort of outside from it, and surrounded by a lot of agricultural landscape with endless fields and dirt roads, sparsely some woods between them as well. I really liked it there because you could go for chill walks and runs through the middle of the fields without much disturbance by city life and other people, except for some hunters and some farmers occasionally. But fast forward to one time when me and my two friends went for a walk through the fields via the dirt paths there at 11 p.m. on a warm late summer day. We chatted and laughed about silly stuff while making our way further and further away from campus. The only stuff that you saw were the red lights of wind turbines and some small towns in the distance, and here and there a bat flying over our heads. We had no lights on us, and only one had his mobile phone with him. When we were like 5 kilometers away from campus, we checked on the maps. We suddenly came to a crossing and wondered where we should go, to make it a loop back to campus without going the same way that we had come from. We decided on a path which went to the right, and that was when things got a bit weird. Bear in mind that we're all pretty tall guys in their early 20s, which is still kind of safe and not easily scareable or anything, but the first thing that I noticed was a shadowy thing moving in the distance down the path that we had started to take. It was barely noticeable, but definitely something was moving there. The others noticed it too, and we joked about some horror movie stuff, but we shrugged it off as some deer that was crossing the path at some point. We continued further into the path and forgot about the shadow, until we saw a high seat perch. They're everywhere for hunters here, near the path. We decided to climb on it, to take a bit of a rest and enjoy the dark landscape. In the distance, you could see the silhouette of some of the small wooded areas, like 100 meters away from our spot. As I was gazing around, my eyes suddenly catch some lights moving through the wooded area. I wiped my eyes, and when I looked again, I saw that it was a person with some kind of a headlamp running through the woods. Like, not jogging, but full-on force sprinting in a parallel direction to our spot. We also checked later on Google Maps that there really was no path through that wooded area. I told the others, and together we followed the light all the way to the right side of the woods, when one of my friends decided that it would be funny to scream in the direction of said person. He screamed something like hello, and the light of the headlamp turned around directly in our direction. After a few seconds, it turned off completely, and we couldn't see the person anymore. And suddenly, this eerie feeling, is the best way that I can describe it, suddenly kicked in for all of us. I don't know why, but the idea of a random person in the middle of nowhere that kind of knows that we were there but we can't see them anymore suddenly scared us a bit. We climbed out of the hunting perch and we booked it out the way that we had come from with a pretty fast walking pace. While on the way back, we kept looking behind us to see if anybody was following us, and I swear that I saw some shadow moving again down the path behind us. It was probably just hallucination because we had an eerie feeling, but I don't know. Back to campus we went to one of the guys' dorms, downed a beer and talked about what had happened. We just couldn't find a good explanation for why a person would act like that in the woods there. I mean, hunters usually don't sprint full force forward here, especially not alone like that, only if there's like a big group to hunt, but that would be loud with many dogs and all that. And a trail runner at 11 p.m. in a random wooded area with no trails seemed really off also. But who knows? Anyway, we never found out who that was, and in the end we just kept away from that part of the path and all the upcoming walks that we went on. But still, something about those shadows and seeing that person there, it still gives me the creeps. This happened to me Wednesday night. So my boyfriend lives in the town over, and he orders me lifts back and forth to go and see him. We've been doing this for over the past 7 months without any problems. But we spent the day together and had an amazing time as always, and he ordered me a lift back home. The guy pulls up and my boyfriend puts me in the car and gives me a passionate kiss goodbye. The driver is from Cuba, hardly speaks a lick of English, and is using Google Translate the entire time to talk to me. First, it started off as, "Do you mind sitting in the front seat? I don't like for people to sit behind me." Okay, no problem. However, instead of letting me out of the car, he asks me to climb over the seat, which made me feel a bit uncomfortable, and then I realized that he was staring at me the whole time that I'm doing so. Then he proceeds to tell me, "I hope I'm not being too daring, but you're very beautiful." Okay, cool, I get this compliment all the time, so I say thank you, but I'm a bit put off by this, to be honest. He goes on like a regular driver, asking me if the music was okay, and the volume and all that, you know, the regular stuff. Then he starts asking me about the address that I'm going to. "Am I taking you to your home?" I reply, "Yes, I'm going home." He then asks, "Can I go home with you?" I laugh at this and say no. He asks about the guy that put me in the car, if he was my boyfriend or my husband. He's my boyfriend, my soon-to-be husband. He asks, "Can I be your boyfriend too?" I say absolutely not. He asks why not. I say that I'm totally against that I'm in love with my boyfriend very much, and that I'm extremely loyal and faithful to him. He says he doesn't have to know. In Cuba, we believe in having multiple partners, and not all of them know about each other. And I say, well, that's definitely not a thing for me. I don't believe in that one bit. He says, "Your boyfriend makes the mistake of sending you home alone. I would have taken you myself to make sure you got there safe." I'm getting very upset at this point, and I'm only laughing at what he says, trying to maintain a friendly composure because I know how ugly things could turn if I start giving this guy attitude. He doesn't speak again for a while, and when he does, he asks me again if he could come home with me. I tell him no again, and he says, "You're so beautiful. I really want to be your other boyfriend." I don't even say anything, but shake my head no and start fidgeting with my phone. He tells me that he has a lot of money and that he would take care of me. I told him that I didn't care about that and that I wasn't interested. He asks if he could give me his number so that we could text each other, and I say no. After what seemed like an eternity, we pull up to my house and he gets down trying to help me with my bags. I decline his help and he tells me, "Hold on," and pulls out his phone one more time and asks, "Can I come inside with you?" I tell him have a good night and to have a safe trip back, and dart inside as fast as I could, locking all the doors behind me, calling my boyfriend immediately so that he could report this weirdo because I don't want this unpleasant experience to happen to anybody else. In the end, though, the only thing Lyft did was give my boyfriend a $5 credit to his account for the unpleasant experience. He wasn't even able to tell him. He really wasn't even able to tell them why it was so unpleasant. And look, I know, stories like this aren't actually the scariest or creepiest ones out there, but if you were a young woman and in a stranger's car like this, and they were pressing like this and trying to come into your home and everything, trust me, going through something like this is actually pretty terrifying. So yes, ladies, creepy drivers are definitely a thing, and please, be careful out there. When I was about 4, this was in 1997, my mum and brothers went to a water park on a weekend during the summer. The park was set up so that you would walk through the entrance and run directly into a food court with the little information or map station there. To the left was inside an arcade area with a roller coaster, a little one, directly outside of it, and behind the arcade building was an enormous wave pool. To the right of the entrance was the kiddie park, and then behind the kiddie park was a lazy river and all the water slides with it. Since my brothers were older and they wanted to ride the big slides, my mum and me split from them to head to the kiddie park. I remember playing for a little while, making some friends with some of the kids, when this one little boy asked me if I wanted to go to the wave pool. Since I was little, my mum told me that I was not allowed to go to the wave pool, at least without an adult, so I told him that I couldn't. He then said that it's not a problem. My dad is already waiting for us, and he's already told my mum that he was going to watch us. Well, being a dumb kid and marveling at the wave pool since we got there, I was pretty much sold and followed him over there. My mum probably didn't notice at the time because the lawn chair that she was sitting in around the kiddie pool was being blocked by little kid slides and billions of other little children. But we headed to the wave pool and met the kid's dad. He immediately took my hand and guided me into the wave pool. I remember only being there for like 2 minutes tops until he picked me up and carried me back out of the pool. I don't think that I even asked where we were going, but I assumed the food court because that's where we were headed. I then remember reaching the entrance gates and a lifeguard approached us and asked if my name was so-and-so, and I said yes, and started crying because I guess I thought that I was in trouble. The lifeguard then grabs me from the dude, and I see my mum running up sobbing. Years later, we're revisiting this story, and she tells me that she noticed that I was missing pretty quickly and told a lifeguard to close off the entrance to the park. I was wearing a yellow bathing suit with pink flowers on it and 2 yellow ribbons in my hair, so the description gave me away instantly, when the man was carrying me out, that is. I asked my mum about the kid, and she had no idea what I was talking about. She said that it was just the singular man, and apparently he ran to his car in the parking lot as soon as the lifeguard took me out of his arms. In other words, there was no kid with him.